This is Eric Rutan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew McKay Smith.
G'day everybody, thanks so much for joining me. I've got a treat for you. This is a conversation featuring Grammy Winning producer and engineer extraordinaire, Mike Exeter. Mike covers a heap of ground throughout almost 3 hours of conversation. He talks about his work with Cradle of Filth across the two albums that matter, Dusk and Her Embrace, and Cruelty and the Beast, and then there's the EP, From the Cradle to Enslave. You'll be interested to know that Mike helped solve the riddle of just why Jan Peter Genkel was asked to produce Cruelty and the Beast. And if you've listened to my conversations with Stuart Anstis, Nick Barker and Greg Moffitt from the group, much of what Mike has to say expands on topics covered throughout those episodes. Now, his insight into Cradle of Filth's glory years is but one aspect of Mike's amazing career, and throughout this chat, other topics covered include working with his good mate Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath throughout the past quarter of a century, working on Black Sabbath's final album, and he puts to rest the speculation around Bill Ward's non-involvement. Dealing with Ozzy means that you've got to deal with Sharon, so hear what he has to say about her. He also talks about what it was like to work with Rick Rubin. That's hilarious, actually. And we dive into his work with Judas Priest, in which Mike settles the debate once and for all surrounding Glenn Tipton's contribution to the last album, Firepower. He also talks about working with Ronnie James Dio on the Heaven and Hell album from 2009. Elsewhere, Glenn Hughes, former Priest drummer Dave Holland, they all get a mention. There's so much. This conversation was actually recorded on a Sunday evening, Brisbane time, so I just spent 2 days at the Gold Coast water parks with my daughters, so if you're watching, that's why I'm a shade of beetroot red, and if you're listening, that's why I'm not as articulate as I wish that I could be. But Mike more than makes up for that. He's a terrific fella. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, and I sincerely hope we can do it again, as there are plenty of other topics to address, such as his work, believe it or not, with Britney Spears and Christina Aguilera. The fella's done it all, so here he is, Mike Exeter.
I have to say, the other week I was traveling. I do a lot of walking. Well, I haven't been recently, but I do try to walk. And I was, I had a listen to a couple of the not snippets. I listened to a good couple of hours of the Stuart and the Greg interviews.
Oh yeah,
and they're really interesting. Bless him, old Stuart. He was a good lad. I liked him. He really was.
I'll start with that. That point, then.
Yeah.
Where does you've recorded the best in the business? Let's face it, and your mates with the best in the business. Where does Stuart rank?
He was I considered him a mate because we stayed in touch. I think he was a really, really talented guy. Who got, I'm guessing there was always fallouts in Cradle of Filth, you know, so he's up there with one of the more creative talents in terms of writing and playing. He was a really, really good player, but his creativity drove him, I think, more than his playing. I think he loved the actual getting his emotional creativity out. And I mean, we didn't speak for a long time. I bumped into him a couple of times and we didn't speak for a long time. Then I spoke to him a couple of years ago, you know, after probably like 15 years, and we must have been on the phone for 2 hours, you know, so it's like, it's that kind of thing. I think there's that massive respect. And I did hear from his wife after he died, and apparently he'd always said nice things about me. So you know, I always said what a great player he was. He made me laugh in the studio, mainly when he was getting stressed by the other members of the band. I mean, it was like, I was the one they would come to, which was hilarious, you know, especially when you hear the full story of how I actually got involved in that project, you know, it's like, so. Yeah.
Well, go ahead, tell us that story.
But I'm not going to tell you that. No, no, what happened was I'd spent, this was the early 90s, so I'd spent the sort of the burgeoning years or the formative years of my career had been out in the US. I'd gone to college out there. I'd done a little bit over here, but then I went to college out in Florida, and then I ended up in New York State. And I was really being influenced by a lot of the American rock stuff that I hadn't heard just a totally different culture. By the time I got back to the UK, I was still trying to navigate through what was going on in the British music industry, which was we'd sort of been taken over by boy bands and very strange music industry stuff. Also, I guess it was actually while I was still out in the States, Nirvana hit. So that completely destroyed all the hair metal and maybe sent it a bit more underground. And I'd never really taken much notice of anything related to heavy metal, black metal, any of that stuff. One of my friends at a studio I worked up in Rochester, New York, he was into it, and he used to laugh at my reaction to the vocals and stuff like that. And it got to about, I think it was 95, possibly. Yeah, it would have been, I think 95. Or 96, the guy from Music for Nations, the record label, who was dealing with them at the time, I presume it was they'd split up and they'd reformed with this new lineup, and they were looking to make the most of what they'd started with the previous lineup, and so they had all the multi-tracks for what was to become Dusk, and they liked Birmingham in the Midlands of the UK for some reason. I think it was because Nick Barker had a good friendship with the guys from Napalm Death who were local. Mm-hmm. So they kind of gravitated towards wanting to do something around the Midlands. And I was head engineer at UB40 studio by this point, and they'd got in contact. We were pretty much the only studio in town that was capable of doing 48-track stuff, and they needed 48 tracks. So I think his name was Dan, but I may be wrong there. So this guy from Music for Nations, I think he was a fellow Ozzy actually. He got in touch and he said, I hear you're the head engineer. I'd love to talk to you about maybe producing this album. So I was like, yeah, great. Send me a DAT, which in those days was a pretty high quality format of recordable cassette. So this DAT arrived, and I happened to be at home one day doing some wiring. We were upgrading the studio. So I took some cable looms home, and I thought, I'll put that Cradle of Filth thing on and have a listen. And it coincided with this massive thunderstorm appearing outside. And then Danny's vocals, and the drums didn't sound very big. And it was just this noise. And I just went, no, I don't know what I can offer to this. I probably should. I think I'm the wrong person to do this. This just isn't in my wheelhouse at the moment. You know, I mean, lovely that we've got this band coming in. And I thought, I'll have a word and I'll politely say, I don't think it's me. I don't think I do it justice. So I sort of turned it down, and then within a few weeks, they'd been into. I think Faye Walvin had already taken on their management at the time.
Okay, that settles that question. Then that's a big question that I had that I thought you might have been able to answer. So
go on. Then what was the question?
Yeah. It was exactly that, because there's a whole. The context of Faye Walvin coming in is the band effectively changing and becoming Danny and the Filths. Okay, right. That's the perception that I have, and that's based on the conversations that I've had to date. But in terms of obtaining a definitive answer for when she came in, this was when Stuart was effectively the head of the band musically for a couple of years.
I would say so. Yeah, I mean, when they arrived, so they got. It did me a favour. So I was trying out a new assistant. He decided this guy was freelancing, a guy called Dan Sprigg, who I think it's been mentioned a couple of times.
Yeah,
he was a freelancer, and he was coming in and he was assisting on the odd session. I already had another full-time assistant. He was mainly tasked with working with UB40. So Dan was around the periphery, and I knew he was into his heavy metal and rock. So I thought, this could be perfect if only they can find someone then to work on the album. So when Faye had entered the fray, and this was way before they came to the studio, so she was definitely involved. She'd mentioned it to Kit, her husband, and he was thrilled because it was his return to what was called the Abattoir. It was Depp International in the 90s, but the Abattoir studio was the original studio that UB40 built back in the early 80s. He'd done the big Magnum album on a Storyteller's Night. He'd done that in the downstairs studio. So he was like, oh, this will be brilliant. I can come back and see the old studio, and all this. And I didn't know any of his history. I didn't know Faye's history. I mean, long story short, she'd worked for the Black Sabbath camp under the guys that now look after Ian Gillan when they had that management. Kit had done Bowie. He'd done David Gilmour album, which I was most impressed by, being a Floydie.
Thin Lizzy as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and there's a little story in there for later as well, the Thin Lizzy thing. That's quite funny. It involves the Gladiators, the TV series.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I remember that, yeah.
Gladiators and Cradle of Filth in a building together. So,
okay.
yeah. So they had suggested Kit did it. So we had a chat, Kit and I was like, oh, great. I said, look, we got this guy, Dan, who sounds like he's perfect to assist you on this. So it started to go ahead, and then they said, well, we love the idea. Could we just get in for a day or so? We've got all these multi-tracks to go through. We haven't got any rough mixes. So can we just have the studio for a day or so? So I set that all up, and another assistant, Dan, sat with them overnight, and they literally just played the multi-tracks and created rough mixes of the entire album as it stood. So, and he had to do, poor bugger, he had to do drums were definitely okay. So everybody had the drums, and then he had to do versions without bass, versions without guide guitars, versions without guide vocals. So he was there for 24 hours.
And this is the cacophonous version. This is the original version that had different musicians that didn't have Stuart on it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Or is this a version?
This is what I guess what they started to. They overdubbed this, so whatever was on there got redone except the drums.
Because the drums is nicked the entire way through on the original Sin version, and then on the Music for Nations version. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that went well, and they were like, yeah, we're great, well, let's go ahead. And I didn't think much more about the project until they came in. And actually, I mean, they were so nice, all of them. They're just, every one of them was a nice person.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
They couldn't have been more polite. I mean, I know they hated the record label because that's their job. I met Faith not too short a time into it, as far as I can remember. But yeah, she was great. She was a good person to have at the end of the phone to liaise between, what was going on. And obviously she was getting everything from Kit. Kit was a taskmaster, but he was great. So I mean, really, I didn't really do that kind of music. I wouldn't say I really do it now, but I'm capable of it now, and I understand it. But initially, I was just on the periphery of it, and just sort of being a part of what needed to happen, just to sort of make the session go smoothly.
That nothing else sounds like that album. I just cannot understand why the management of Emperor or Satyricon or what have you if they heard Dusk and went, wow, we don't want to sound exactly like this, but what you did here using 48 tracks, we need to do something similar, because a lot of the music of that period, as you're probably aware, I love Emperor and Satyricon and these great bands, but their music has suffered because it didn't have the depth and the breadth of what you brought to it.
Well, I would say, I think the reason that is because Kit applied a classic sensibility to it. And I'm lucky. I started in the late 80s. So I came up through tape. Computers was something that we flew stuff across to and then got it back on tape as quickly as fucking possible, because we didn't trust that the data was going to be there the following day. As far as I can remember, the only computers involved in the making of Dusk were probably my Mac running an early version of Performer to do MIDI sequencing. There was no digital audio editing, workstation stuff, anything. So it was very much classic engineering making it sound as huge and as lush as possible. Nick took a bit of exception to that, mainly because it probably wasn't brutal enough for him. I think there's a fine line, and I think that's why certain people are drawn to producing certain stuff. I find a lot of modern metal is like an exercise in data entry. It's
absolutely,
everything's on the grid, samples over everything. There's nothing that suggests any kind of emotional delivery. And let's face it, when I was going through depression years ago, I listened to dark stuff because it was uplifting. So it has to have emotion. All music has to have an emotional context. And, even through that recording, I managed to get over the fact that Danny's screams and squawks used to go right through me, but they complemented the vast orchestrations perfectly. And I think the thing about Dusk is that the band were still slightly subservient to the process of making it. Kit was a strong character. He's the first person I'd ever told a band to shut up, I'm trying to do some work here, while they were all getting louder in the back of the control room, and they all put their heads down and went, sorry, like naughty schoolboys, and then giggled, obviously. But, so I think it was a very, very creative process. I learned a lot of Kit. He was like, I ended up assisting quite a lot on it. And by the time it got to the last minute overdubs and we went into mixing, I was full-time assisting him because Dan Sprigg had gone down to do another project in the other room. So I had a fairly big part on the album. What a lot of people don't know, and God bless Greg, he's slightly in denial about the fact that I also did quite a lot of the keyboards on that album.
That's come up a fair bit, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think it was through any fault of his own, but he just got hold of a Kurzweil K2500, I think the band had owned, which was a great orchestral device. And I had a K2000, so I was helping him out with all that. And I think about a month or so in, he had some stuff he had to go and do back in Ireland. We were all joking, the old racist thing of like he's gone back to tend to his potatoes or something. But he did have he had some stuff he needed to get on with, and there was a bed of keyboards there, but it wasn't what they were. It's not what they were looking for, but there was a hell of a lot more to get on with. So.
Look, lovely fellow, Greg. Sorry, just to interrupt.
He's lovely.
Awesome
Great
guy. I speak to him semi-regularly over Messenger and whatever else since. And out of all of them that I've spoken to, he's probably the most different. He manages York Minster, I think, at the moment. The guy's a professional in a very different sense to what the other guys are up to. Yeah,
he definitely didn't feel like he was part of the argument process that was going on. I would say Robin was quiet, but between Danny, Nick, and Stuart, there was definitely some, there was a bit of arsiness going on, and I think that helps. Not to the point where people are falling out, but I think it helps with the process of everybody kind of checking everybody else's work. But that was what really got me involved. I ended up. Kit coming up to me saying, we've got a shitload to do. He goes, I've had a chat with the studio manager, and he said that the downstairs studio hasn't got much going on. If I send you downstairs with a couple of ADATs and you set up your keyboards, would you mind starting to do orchestrations? I went, yeah, that'll be fun. So I spent at least a month doing all the orchestrations and playing as much on the album as was required, following Stuart's guitar lines, augmenting them. There was some big, powerful stuff in there. And I would get on with that. Kit would come down, give me some direction. Danny would come down, Stuart would come down, and then it would get taken onto the final multi-tracks. And in fact, I remember just before we got the, it was going to go to mastering or something, very, very late on. And Danny said, have you heard Carl Miller's Mask? And I went, oh, yeah, that's quite sweet, isn't it? He goes, well, we can't use the original. Could you redo that? So I spent a night redoing that for them. And that was great fun. It was like, I do remember it was like the days of, we had CD sample libraries. So Danny was sat there with Robin going through the catalogue looking for things like Woman Crying, Door Creaking and all this stuff while we were rebuilding Carmilla's Mask. It was quite a creative time for me. I loved it. I really enjoyed the whole process. So by the time it got finished, it was a very lush sounding album that really everybody, I think, was pleased with the outcome. And it certainly went on to be something that I listened to quite a lot, which really surprised me, because there were some great songs on there.
It's a monument to what was possible that was then never repeated for some reason. It's the only album that sounds like it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the follow-up wasn't quite so good.
Well, you were a part of that too, apparently. There's a lot of questions that come up about that album, and in
mostly,
songs,
why does it sound so shit?
Yeah, and look, Nick's told me, and Nick's not the sort of guy that cries easily, as you bloody well know. And Sarah has stated that she couldn't believe what she heard, or words to the effect.
No.
The sentiment was similar from both of them.
Yeah,
Stuart was a bit kinder to it ultimately, but then Danny's gone back and bloody redone it, and it sounds worse. I just can't understand what the hell's going on with
it sounds thicker.
But it's lost its dynamic. It's lost the guitars were at the center of that, and at least whether it was
that's probably because Stuart's playing them, and Danny doesn't like Stuart. It's that.
And that's what it seems to come down to, doesn't it? It seems to be like if Danny likes somebody, then their position is elevated. If he doesn't, like with Nick and Stuart, then let's make their parts not sound as, say, the way that they can to enhance the music, and it's just self-sabotaging.
The thing for me, I hadn't seen Danny since 1999 when we did from what was the EP we did?
From the Cradle to Enslave.
Yeah, we did that. And I like Danny. I mean, I hadn't seen him until 2 years ago. We met at Bloodstock. And we must have been chatting for about 40 minutes. It was lovely. It was just hilarious. We were going back to all the stories about paper planes with swastikas on them and all this shit that had gone on with Jan. It was fun. And then 5 minutes later, I bumped into Nick and I went, I've just had a catch up with Danny. He goes, you poor cunt. I'm like, Nick, it's been 25 years? Let it go. I get on really well with Nick. He's a good friend of my mate Andy Sneap. It's like we see each other. But I'll tell you something, and I'm this isn't me trying to ingratiate to anybody, but I've worked with Tony for 26 years. My introduction to Iommi came as a result of Kit Walvin on that album on Dusk. That was where the introduction happened. Fronting a band and keeping it together is the most thankless thing you could ever want to do. I don't know if you've seen the Foo Fighters Back and Forth documentary, where Dave Grohl comes across as a bit of an egotistical, doesn't care about the band members, almost like he anything to keep the band going. And in a sense, that's what people do. It's down to them to keep the name going. Tony's coming for flack all the time, the revolving doors of Black Sabbath. It's like, that's what happens when you've got someone that is pretty single-minded about this is what they do. And I think it's really bad. Families fall out. Look what happened with Tony and Ronnie over the years. I mean, thankfully they buried the hatchet long before Ronnie died. But this is what happens. And I do think it's a shame, because I think when we recorded Cruelty, it sounded fucking huge. And by the time arguments had happened and complete trust had evaporated in the producer, it was never going to be anything other than a shit show.
So do you think Jan or Jan, sorry, I don't know how you pronounce his name.
I think it was Jan.
Jan. Is he as much of a victim as, say, Stuart or Nick in that process, or Sarah even?
I think he was the wrong choice. Now, this again, what because I'm giggling because it's bringing back memories of the running jokes. What happened was I was brought in on that album. The band wanted me to produce it. The record label said, we need a better name than Mike. He hasn't done enough in this.
Really?
You know, this is
Music for Nations
98.
actually said that.
Yeah, well, pretty much. I mean, it was 1997 when we started it. No, when we talked about it, it was 1997. We were due to start in the January of 98. Boxing Day 97, my then wife's dad died. And that blew a hole in my my life for a bit because I had to support her and the family. So I was going to co-produce with Jan. I had to call him and say, my wife's dad's died. I'm just going to have to step back. I'm going to have to step out of this. I can't stay at the studio later than a certain time. We've got a great pair of assistants. Well, we had an assistant. So Dan Sprigg was kind of engineering for Jan. And then Don Morley, who had basically sat there while I played keyboards on the previous one, he assisted Dan. And it was going okay. So I was like dipping in and out. Now, about 3 weeks in, I had to say to my wife, I think, are you all right? Like, maybe she was starting to say, if you need to go back in, you've got to do your job. I'd got a sense that stuff was already starting to go south. So I got myself back in the situation. But even from the first day when Jan turned up, he was playing Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue as like the epitome of a great drum sound, which when you've heard Nick attack people for drum sounds, you'd probably not want to do that.
No. So that's him being a bit tone deaf, unfortunately, on that one there. I mean, Nick's drumming, nobody sounds like Nick, really, do they?
No, exactly. And I think with that, they were downstairs. I remember having to walk into the live room, and I'd say to the guys, just knock off the mics a second. And I'd go and I'd chat with Nick. And we really bonded because that's why I'm laughing about it, from the fact that I was this Pink Floyd prog rocky person that was now having to be the confidant to a black metal band. It made me, like, wow, maybe I am cut out for this. And Nick was really passionate. We used to laugh. He's like, I just want me drums to sound like fucking cannons. And he meant it. He wanted them to be big. But he went into self-sabotage on that album because he walked in a few times and he said, where's the razor blades? I'm going to fucking slash the tape. Because it's like he was so distressed by what this was turning into. And I think ultimately, yes, Jan was the wrong choice and he was out of his depth to deal with them.
Why was Jan then who selected him and why? Because, so here's an important point. If you didn't have a pedigree at the time, which I would say bullshit, to be frank with you, just come from producing a UB40 album.
Well,
but then this is what had led up to that point within sort of a 12-month period. What had Jan done to earn the right to sit in the producer's chair?
Well, this is what we used to laugh at. It was one of the, where you get a young producer trying to get loads of credits and they say, I've worked with. And there'll be one name, and then there'll be a few others that you don't know, and then they say and others, and it means you basically worked. You've been in the room where I don't know Peter Andre came in and did a vocal. underneath that is some local bar bands, and you've worked with nobody else. So he would say, I worked with when I did Therian and Lacrimosa and all the others, and this became the thing. We used to just go and all the others because he didn't really have a pedigree. But that's record labels. They need to hang their thing on something. I mean, God forbid Sabbath may have done that with Rick Rubin. It's like...
Oh, look, you can get me talking for hours about the uselessness of Rick Rubin.
But this is the point. It's like sometimes the labels need to have that, they have to have that thing that says, look who they're working with. It's PR worthy. And I feel it was that. And I didn't really fight because I knew at some point I'd have an involvement because it couldn't go on. I just didn't realize it would be 3 weeks in. And by this time, Les Les Smith had turned up. He was the antithesis of Greg. He was funny. He was. I had him set up in a room next to me. I had like my tech room stroke office at the studio, and we had another smaller tech room. So we set him up with a keyboard workstation and a sequencer. So he was able to take rough mixes and work on all the orchestrations. And he and I would just spend most of the time laughing about stupid shit.
Yeah.
He had great ideas for that album. They were taking it a little bit less orchestral. It was definitely going to be harder. Excuse me. Again, it kind of started okay once we got Nick in the fray. But I think the problem is, production's a real psychology job. You've got to give the artist absolutely what they need to hear to get the best out of them, even if you don't agree that it's best sonically. If you get that performance out of them, you can argue the rest of it later. If you try to be clever and change something on them, they believe wholeheartedly in the sound that they're asking for. Dio, when I recorded him, the U87 was the last mic I would have ever put on him, but it was the mic he wanted. Yeah, he had such a hard, harsh voice. I'd have gone for something way smoother, but he liked the U87 in front of him. He liked to hear the U87 coming through his cans. Therefore, you give Dio what he wants. And then you deal with it afterwards.
Great sounding album, The Devil You Know, man. You did such a good job with that one.
It's one of my proudest achievements. It is. It was so much fun. I mean, you can hear the fun.
Dusk. Yeah, it's right up there with what you did on Dusk, man. It
was a big sounding record. It was, we loved doing it. We had a long stint of writing sessions. I got to know Ronnie like he was a second dad. It was just awesome, and that's what you do. You go, I'm here because of them, so I'm not going to try and be clever. And that's I think where you've got to have this understanding with the artist. It's like, give Nick what he wants. If he doesn't like something, don't try and sneak it back in. Because you're just being a cunt if you do that. You undermine the artist, and then he's not on your side at all.
Did you find that it got really combative with Jan, though?
Yeah, massively. I mean, it was at they got to loggerheads quite a lot. I mean, Nick would have, had he not been pulled away from the probably Stuart would have been the guy that would have stepped in with me and just gone, Nick, just not worth it, mate. You put so much work into it. He would have cut the tape. He'd have taken a razor blade to it and destroyed the work.
He told me the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. He was really fucked off. Yeah. I remember him taking me out to his car. I mean, again, the confidant. He parked his car up the road and he goes, have you got 10 minutes? I went, yeah, what, you going to push me into a canal? He goes, no, mate. We went in his car and we listened to a load of tracks on his cassette player in his car. He said, that's what I want this to sound like. And I went, well, yeah. Why isn't it? Well, because of that, whatever, and I'm like, okay, probably a translation issue, mate. Let's go back and see what we can do. And, you'd paper over the cracks a bit and then Jan will pull something stupid. And, I don't think it was deliberate. I just think they didn't see it the same way. And quite honestly, I mean, in terms of Danny, I think Danny mostly just cared about getting his stories across.
He's not a songwriter. So he's a poet and a lyricist. That's what he does. So he relies on these extraordinary musicians. That triumvirate on Cruelty is probably the best trio of songwriters ever in the history of extreme metal, being Stuart, Nick Barker and Les Smith. You get those three together, you could pretty much just leave them alone and you just help when you need to help. And I think from the sounds of things, Danny almost just did that. Is that your take on things? Yeah,
he was great. I mean, again, he'd go up to my office, he'd be working on lyrics and out would come he was writing for Terrorizer magazine as well. So he was doing all these handwritten articles for Terrorizer with his own cartoons. And he was telling me about the guy that had been arrested for wearing one of the Jesus is a cunt shirts. He presented me with a Jesus is a cunt shirt. At the end, he says, we haven't got many of these left. He said, but you deserve this. And I've still got it. It's fucking brilliant. I do it to annoy people now. I mean, again, I got on well with everybody. I really did, because they individually, even together, they were great. But what made when we first started talking, I said about Stuart. What made me laugh was he would just very calmly. I think Jan, I never remember what their fucking names were. I think he hadn't put as much effort into practicing as he possibly could have. So Stuart was trying to coax him through a fairly simple riff, probably on Cruelty, Brought the Orchids, because that was a great riff. And I remember Stuart just almost, I thought I was in trouble. I just popped in. This was while I was not heavily involved. And he just, he stormed over to me. I went, what's up, mate? He goes, mate, you need a room in here where you can just go and break things. He said, because if you had that, I probably wouldn't want to break the other guitarist in this band. And I was just like, he was so calm, but fuming inside, because it's like, I've put heart and soul into this. Why hasn't the other guy?
Well, Nick described him as Blackie useless. Do you understand? Do you understand why you? I mean, you were there. You're the guy, right? So you can obviously understand why he was called that.
I just think, everybody gets. I don't want to be the guy that keeps avoiding questions, but I think in the heat of passion, you just see people as fucking useless, don't you? You're like, look, I've put my effort in for this. You haven't. The only excuse is that you haven't practiced. You haven't put time and effort into this. What is it they say? Shit or get off the pot.
Yeah.
And
but did John track
any?
Did John track any of the guitars on that album, Cruelty, or was it all Stuart?
Oh, I could imagine he probably did, but back in those days, there's every chance that that something would have got re-recorded. I mean, I can't remember. Joe Barresi said something. I was watching a video with him. He's a mate of mine, and he was laughing about. I think he calls it Dr. Midnight. If you're in trouble, call Dr. Midnight. Dr. Midnight is the guy that comes in when the rest of the band have gone home and retracks all the shit they couldn't play. And there was a bit of Dr. Midnight would go on. It happens on every session.
It does. So, I know. Look, Steve Lukather has alluded to doing some records that are very, very big. He won't say which records he's done.
I'm surprised he hasn't said who, because he throws everybody under the bus. He's hilarious.
Yeah. Well, Steve Vai, I think, did quite a few. Yeah. There are some unknown guys that, I won't say which bands just for the threat of libel or whatever it is, but, but I hear some of these let's just say I hear some of the more prominent pop punk bands, that's not them.
No. It's, it's quite interesting. I mean, ultimately, sometimes it's like, we're either going to destroy this person's confidence or we're just going to get the best out of them. And again, remember, this is 98? Yeah, it would have been 90.
Yep.
Yeah, so it was 98 we were tracking that. We weren't really still into Pro Tools. We were on tape. So the ability to shift, we did use Pro Tools. We had an 8-track Pro Tools system on that album. And we did the odd bit of syncing stuff up to that to do some editing, but there was no way we were getting into editing. It was mainly vocal editing, if anything. It was like to bounce, piece backing vocals together. We may have been running out of tracks, to be honest. So all the guitars had to be spot on. And if John wasn't doing it, there would have been re-records.
Yeah. Well, Nick threatened him with violence. You know that. Nick
he threatens everybody with violence. Except me, actually. Yeah, absolutely. Go. Well, because when you look at it, Nick's a fucking incredible drummer. I mean, when Andy Sneap did the one of his Superior Drummer or Easy Drummer packs, Nick was the guy that did all the MIDI stuff on it.
Holy shit!
Because he's like, all the blast beats, everything that is to do with that metal machine, I think it's called. Barker was the guy on it, and he's incredibly respected. He's a stunning drummer, and that's because he practices. And this is my issue. There's because I mentor production students, and my biggest issue with anybody is fucking laziness. It's
Right.
like I had to put the work in. So if you don't want to know, don't be here. But certainly don't hold the process up. And I can imagine the frustrations. Plus, it was a big thing, wasn't it? I mean, it was the first album they'd written together without any previous songwriting input from the previous incarnation. It was following up a fucking brilliant album. It was introducing a new member, 2 new members probably. Well, just probably one actually, Les.
Spot on.
It needed to be big. And I'm a bit saddened I didn't get a crack at the remix, but because I'd have loved doing that.
Well, that's the question that I had for you. Why on earth? I mean, look, I've got a few issues with Danny. Everything else aside, whatever, he can run the band as he sees fit. But I've got to be frank, he didn't write Cruelty. Stuart did. No. Stuart, Nick and Les wrote Cruelty. And he needed to get somebody in who was there to pick apart the parts. And at the time, this is the thing about, we're all getting a bit older, you know, and I mean, Stu's no longer with us. No. The one guy who could have helped you oversee the sessions to actually remint the tracks in a way that Nick would have felt comfortable. Sarah, I mean, let's not forget Sarah. She would have felt better about it all, no doubt, if she was included. But he went ahead and did it by himself. The question is why? Well,
I guess eventually you get to a point where you work with certain people. I mean, I hadn't seen him for decades, and there's no ill feelings between us. We just grinned and grinned when we were chatting about stuff like a couple of years ago. He asked if I'd heard it, and I said, yeah, I actually think it sounds heavier than the original. I said, as long as you're pleased with it, I'm happy. I had calls with Stuart. He was getting quite anxious, and I think he was trying to pitch for me to be involved. But I said, Stu, you might want to let it go. You know, really, if it's a done thing, you might be just opening up a can of worms that I don't know. I think he and Nick had spoken a lot about it. I met Julie Weir, who was in charge of, I think she's still Music for Nations or so. Anyway, she's to do with was to do with the repackaging. I first met her when I was doing a record years ago with Kill to This with Andy Sneap. She was A&Ring that, and I spoke to her at the Sabbath Museum exhibit a few years ago when they had their sort of 50th anniversary thing, and I said, I've been speaking to a couple of the Cradle of Filth guys. She goes, there's nothing will ever make them talk. She said, it's just a nightmare. She says it's almost, I mean, I can't remember the exact conversation, but I get the feeling she was happy when the remix was done and out.
Yeah, but there's been no mea culpa from Danny toward those three. You know that. I'll leave Les out of it because I understand he does tour managing and a few other things for the group these days. But look, you know, I've spoken to Stu and Nick off the record a few times now. And Stu and I suppose I'd like to think we were mates. You know, and our conversation continued well after our 4-hour long conversation that was posted as the podcast episode. And when I hit him up and I said, look, the fucking thing is out. It's there. And he said, mate, it's sadly predictable. That was his term. And I thought, you poor bastard. I got to say, I felt for him. I felt for Nick in particular because I know how important it was for him to have some say in what was going on. And well, it's not just about the music. The thing is, we could have had, I understand that likely there were photos taken within the rehearsal studio of the band getting their shit together and understanding, you know, making nice with the arrangements that Stuart was coming up with. There was liner notes that should have been contributed. There should have been a narrative that wrapped around like a box set, you know, something really needy and something that fans like me would go, hey, here it is. You know, I mean, that's because my interest in the band virtually stopped dead on a dime after that album came out and Stuart left the band. So, but there was that opportunity, and I if I ever speak to Dan, and it's highly unlikely, to be honest with you, at this point, that I'd even take an opportunity, even if he approached me, given I don't think he would anyway, by the way. I'm just talking pie in the sky stuff now, but given the volume of conversations that I've had with people, Cradle of Filth alumni and important people like you, I was speaking to Nigel Wingrove last week. I mean, these are people who launched the bands.
Yeah,
They're creative. They're wholly. They're all of the creative artifacts from their imagination.
yeah.
The band was going along on a certain trajectory, and then it just sort of blew apart after Midian, and from Midian onwards. And it's Cruelty, that re-release, that remistressing, as he called it, Danny called it, was and well, it was an opportunity to get all of the very important players back into one room, even virtually, so to speak, and to say, what do you think? Here's an opportunity to give old fans like me, us in our 40s, with kids, wives, careers, mortgages, all the bullshit, meaning the mortgages, that's the bullshit part of it. But, all of that sort of stuff would give us an opportunity to have something, a keepsake from that era again, because the band has been very vociferous, as about, not being satisfied. The key players are not satisfied with what happened back then.
Mm. Yeah, it is a shame. I mean, it's it happens again and again, doesn't it? I've been involved in remixing the hated Sabbath album Forbidden. We went right back to the multi-tracks to remix that.
Wow. So you're doing that right now, aren't you?
I did that. Actually, I did it about 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
But it's got to come out as a part of a box set with all the Tony Martin stuff. So we went back to 48-track analog, had it transferred. We actually had it transferred back in about 2009, but then for some reason we ended up doing a Black Sabbath reunion with Ozzy. But we got around to it, and it sounded great, and that was a difficult one because Cozy wasn't there.
I was going to ask you about Cozy. Thank you for bringing him up. God bless him.
Oh, man. Do you know what? Because I never met him, but I know he and Tony were really, really, really good friends. And Jeff Nichols had died as well. So there's two out of the 5 people who were no longer there. And I just used to sit there grinning because I'm like, this is like a masterclass in cymbal work. If something needed punctuating, you guarantee Cozy had a symbol for it. And I loved doing that album. And I think we've done it justice. But there's still stuff, Tony Martin feels very aggrieved about the way he was talked about during the, in the autobiographies, and Tony, Neil Murray was great. That was what a fucking bass player. He went full geezer on that. That never came across on the original. So I was kind of like turning it into, what would it sound like if I'd got hold of it back in 94? Just bring it up to date enough, not trying to be too clever with it, and just make it sound big, wide, and powerful. And now even the Ice-T rap in the first song sounds huge because it's part of a massive, massive section. So we still haven't got it out, but the amount of stuff that goes backwards and forwards between people that essentially wants to be avoided. It's like, just let it be what it is. I think it's a difficult one because, again, it's that thing of Tony's in charge of this lot. And I love what we've done on it. And he's very proud of it because he's been very vocal about hating that album. And yet he's like, this is what it should have sounded like. Now, there's quite a few people who've got their asses in their hands about all the stories as to why it didn't sound like that in the first place. So it's very difficult to navigate something that's a similar age to Cruelty, if you think about it.
Absolutely, same era.
Yeah, so it's a hard one to navigate. I wouldn't want to be in a band with any of those people. I wouldn't want to have been in a band with Cradle of Filth, knowing the high tempers that go on and that the arguments. And I think, I'm not supporting anybody particularly, but because of all the stuff that I've gone through over the years, seeing it from Danny's side, he may be in a place now where his vehicle is him, and it's a cast of paid musicians who do his bidding, and he gets to go out every night and be Danny Filth. And as a result, he's got his thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I know Paul Alinda. I don't know him well, but we talk occasionally. No. And who Paul Alinda
was he was the original guitarist,
correct,
wasn't he?
Yeah. Yes, and I'm talking to Paul Ryan this week.
Oh,
so
great.
Paul Ryan wrote Principle.
Okay.
And so Paul Ryan, this is how I've got yet to ask Paul about this, but my understanding is Paul wrote Principle, and Paul Allender wrote Dusk.
Right. Okay.
Now I could be wrong, but I've got to go back and listen to my conversation with Paul Allender just to confirm some of that. But Paul, look, there's a lot that I can't say because Paul Allender's asked me not to share it. He wants. Okay, what I will say is Paul wants the entire thing behind him.
Yes.
Paul Allender wants the entire thing behind him.
Yeah.
That should tell anybody with a brain all they need to know.
Yeah, precisely.
But he was not a hired gun. He was the songwriter in the group alongside Stuart. They just were never in the band together.
Yeah.
And for him to say that after appearing on, I've long said that without Stuart, the band doesn't break large. Without Paul Allender, Danny doesn't have a career.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did Paul come back into the band? Is that my understanding?
He wrote Midian. Yeah, he wrote Midian.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So he did that, but then I think I'm trying to think what I can say without, offending. I'm just interested in offending Paul. The bottom line is Paul's contributions, a bit like Stuart, they weren't.
Yeah.
There's. Okay. Nick has spoken about it, the financial side of it. Yeah. He wanted to audit the band when he left, and he wished that he'd stayed on for another few months, and he wished Stuart and Les had left it as a block, engaged solicitors and audited what went onto the books. That's a big issue, mate, that one right there.
Right. Okay.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
And I really feel for them on that front. I mean, if you work your ass off, as they've clearly done, creating an album, which is all time. I mean, this is an album that's going to be picked up in my view, 100 years' time by all these bands like Satyricon, Emperor, Cradle of Filth, mate, they're like Metallica and Iron Maiden, and you know how we listen to B.B. King records and those old blues records from the 40s, 50s, 60s and stuff. That's what this is going to be. It's just going to continue to be. It's continuously influential. The only thing that's going to change is the influence of technology and how that music is interpreted by new musicians, if you like. And you've got these original gangsters like Nick and Stu who are. I'm trying to do, in part, what I'm trying to do is actually bring their story to life to ensure that their name isn't lost to history and they're not just hired guns, because they're far from that. They're the writers. They're the songwriters.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I think. I think since the last time I did anything with them, which would have been the From the Cradle EP, it sort of felt like every time you saw a new incarnation, there was just another bunch of faceless people behind Danny.
40 plus tenured musicians at this point. It's the most of any band that is still relevant.
Wow, that is more than an
incredible statistic. Yeah.
It's almost as bad as Journey, actually, but there you go.
But aren't they a schmozzle these days? Aren't they just a bloody, a dysfunctional unit that I can't. Here's the thing about this, Mike. Why on earth do the fans keep turning up and supporting a version of Journey and Foreigner and these legacy acts?
I don't know. I mean, I've got some. I won't go too deep into it, but look at what goes on with KK and Priest. It's like let the band do what they do. Let him do what he does. KK, shut up and just stop stirring the shit, because Richie brought back an incredible amount of energy into that band on Redeemer of Souls. It went stratospherically better on Firepower, and it gave them a jumping off point to go for another few years. And all the way in the background, you've got this battle going on between KK and them, and sniping and negative energy, and it divides the fans. I'm a Pink Floyd fan. Everybody's going, what do you think about Roger Waters remixing Dark Side of the Moon? I said, he's doing it to wind Gilmore up. Does nobody get this? For fuck's sake.
I understood that straight away. I know. I'm so glad you said that. Yeah. Yeah, they're just pissing each other off.
Totally. I've got. Thankfully, my favourite album by them is Animals. It's a masterpiece. It's Pink
Same
Floyd.
Here as well.
It's brilliant. They remixed Animals in 2018. It came out at the end of last year because they spent 4 years fighting about the fucking credits. If that doesn't say band into politics. You know, Gilmour and Waters were fighting during the pandemic because Waters said, I don't know why Gilmour won't let me post videos up of stuff I do for Pink Floyd. You know, I'm doing recuts of Mother acoustically. I'm putting them up on his website, and all we get is his and Polly's fucking son reading poetry, you know. And it's like, maybe the Floyd fans would prefer to see Waters on there. And you just can't believe the I mean, it's passion, isn't it? It's fanatical. You know, fans are fanatical, but that's what happens. And I have favourite eras of bands, and I don't think that anybody is beyond reproach. I think Queen made some absolute horror stories of records, but they're still one of my favourite bands. Rush, horror stories of records, but they're still another of my favourite bands. Pink Floyd, I like from Meddle to probably Animals. The Wall and the Final Cut were okay for me. It doesn't make me not a fan. I just have a particular period where they resonated with what I did. If you've got bands that last 40, 50 years, 30 years, whatever, they're going to win and lose fans, aren't they? And all they can do is be what they need to be at that time. And I think that's possibly what's so sad about something like Cruelty is they were trying their hardest to be the best they could at that time, and the stars just didn't align, and it set them off on some weird course where, you know, by the time we got to cut the EP, we had two drummers on that EP.
Was Sargentson and Adrian Evanson from At the Gates.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, that was cut two separate stints up at Bar Street, and it was like, who have we got this time? And then I can't even remember if Stuart was involved in all those recordings or not. Nick had obviously gone. It was like, oh, that's a shame. And then I think Les was getting pissed off.
He wrote the originals. Yeah, he wrote the original tunes that were on there and played also on the covers there. But it was
right.
It was he did not want that. According to Stuart, someone opened his quote. I think is not verbatim, but is that EP came out because someone opened their fucking trap to the record company. Those songs should have been the original songs should have been part of. And here's the thing, and this is where I think This is where I start thinking about where this band could have gone with your involvement. A Clive Barker concept album, right there. Okay, with the two original, I think it's one original song on that EP there. I mean, the EP isn't. I mean, I'm not saying it's forgettable. The tunes that Stuart wrote on it, fantastic. He was taking it in a more hardcore punk style direction with the black metal influence in it, but it just didn't happen. And it was. I mean, it had a live outtake of Funeral in Carpathia on it. Like, for God's sakes, I mean, you can't improve on the original, so don't try. And the
only thing, the thing I liked about it was getting Danny to actually have to sing something on Sleepless. We were wetting ourselves because it was like he had to actually sing a melody, and the giggling that was going on. I mean, you know, he was fun. We used to stick him in the one of the booths at Bar Street, and I think he was on his red wine, so we'd have him in there, and he was getting more and more relaxed. And Dan Sprigg was doing it with me, and I always insisted on having a keyboard sampler in the room so I could bring up sound effects, and it was usually farts because I'm childish, and it would be. We stopped giving Danny feedback about his singing. We would just play different farts, depending on whether he'd done a good take or not. Yeah. And they'd get more and more reverbed out as the night went on, and we were in fits of giggles. And he's in the other room going, I think I'm going to be sick here. I feel like I'm in a wet fart chamber, you know. It was good fun. And I don't know if you know, we used to call him 3PO. Because
that hasn't come up. Tell me the story. That's great.
Oh, awesome. God. Yeah, I've told a load of people that in public. He thinks we call him R2D2 because he's quite short. But we didn't. We used to call him 3PO because he would get because you probably heard him talk. He talks a little bit like that, and he's very sort of clipped. And so he's like, when are we going to be able to do my vocals? I think it's about time we did my vocals. And I'm like, all right, calm down, 3PO. And Stuart nearly spat the dummy. He was pissing himself. So for me, he's always been 3PO. And and I guess if you take that, it's like you know, when you're being bullied, you imagine you bully naked with, you know, with a woman's dress on or something. Suddenly it's like it minimizes their effect on you. He never intimidated me. As I say, I always got on really well with Danny. But I could see that, God, I wouldn't want to be part of that crowd. And
yeah. Well, he's a bit of I've described him as a Napoleon type.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it just seems to fit. And the band has succeeded, all things considered, despite itself.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They've there's a lot of bands like that. Well, again, parallel with Priest. They how they're still going, considering what happens to try and fuck themselves up. It's insane, isn't it? Can
you answer the question? Don't answer it. I'll edit this out if you need me to. No dramas whatsoever. But did Glenn play on Firepower?
Yes, he did. Yeah. I spent a lot of time with Glenn. He'd had, I don't know if he'd had an accident, which I don't think ever made it into the press, but he struggled to walk up and down the stairs. The control room was upstairs. So we set up a secondary control room where he and I would work through his guitar parts because he'd written an awful lot of the riffs. So we sat there and kind of coaxed him through doing it. And so I spent a lot of time on Firepower working with him just to make sure he got the important riffs done. He did a lot of the solos as well. He wasn't in a good state, but because the problem with Parkinson's is you have good days and bad days.
Yeah.
So, and the more you try, the more frustrated you get and the more it exacerbates the problem. So when he was having a bad day, he's very stubborn, Glenn. And I would say, why don't we just go for a walk down the river? You know, and I've got to get this guitar part done, knowing full well that it was never going to happen. And then I'd come back the next day and say, should we have another go at that? And he'd be energized in the morning and he'd be brilliant. So it was probably the last time he really, really did creatively play properly and with passion. But again, that's 2017. That's coming up for 5 years ago. So it's degenerated quite a lot in that time. But he's dogged in his determination to make it happen. And he does it with he's a pain in the ass because he's got a really funny sense of humor. There's a little glint in his eye. One day I walked in the control room because I would say to Andy and Tom Allen, I'd say, fucking please take him off my hands for half an hour. I'm going to have another breakdown, because my breakdown was pretty much as a result of the previous album. It was a long period. It was a long period of time and events leading up to it. But the thing that broke was at the end of that album. So I always say, you nearly fucking killed me, because we're going to try and kill you again, Mike. We want you on board. Anyway, so I remember the one day they'd got him upstairs, and I thought, oh great, I'm just going to go for a walk myself, because he's got a beautiful farm on a river in Worcestershire. So I went for a little walk, and his dog came along, Rufus, and I came back and I thought, right, I'll go and see what's going on upstairs. And I remember he's in the control room and he's like, play it again. And they're playing this song that they put heart and soul into, with all these backing vocals, and they've done a real top job on it. And at the end of the playback, Glenn just goes, well, I'm just not, I don't think it's a Priest song. And they were all like, what do you mean? He goes, it sounds like some. He goes, I know we all like Queen. He says, but this is like Queen do musical theatre. He said, I just don't think it's us. And they were so dejected. And he stood up quite he was quite bad on his feet at that point. And he stood up and walked out of the room. He said, come on, Mike. He goes, that'll teach him to fucking say they don't like my solo, and burst out laughing. And I mean, he still got his own way, because the song didn't make it. But I said, I knew that was what you were doing. You can't. And he just pissed himself. And they were all like, it's not funny, you know. And, but it's that kind of thing, you know. He is a great guy, and it's shocking what's happened to him, and equally frustrating, you know. I mean, I remember sitting there going, Glenn, don't knock yourself about with this. thinking, my God, he sat here. This is beautiful. This is a dream place to live. It's like where he wanted to retire. And the one thing that gave him this place is being taken away from him, the ability to play. And, that gave him the success and the money. And it's really sad. So we did everything we could to make sure that he appeared on that album as much as possible. And it really is his last hurrah. I can't imagine. I'm not doing anything on the new album. I talk to Sneap a lot. They've been doing a lot of recording.
How come you're not involved in the new album?
Well, Andy's out on the road with them all the time.
So they're doing it on the road, are they?
Well, the pandemic hit, so they've had times where they got together for songwriting sessions, and then I think during production rehearsal times they've been out in the States, so they've gone in and they've done recordings, and so they've been able to do a lot of it to coincide with people's visas, because it's a band that's made up of people living in America with British passports and UK with American passports. So it's difficult to pull a band like that together for any period of time. So it makes sense to have them on the road. And when they're all in the same town together, you can be quite efficient, while stuff's being done. So as far as I know, it's in progress. I think last time I heard, Andy was talking about vocals. So I think he was possibly going to go out to do them at Rob's because,
Rob's still in San Diego from memory, isn't he? He's
out in Scottsdale. He had a place in San Diego. Yeah, he did. He had two houses, but the one he kept was in Scottsdale.
Gotcha.
He's great, Rob. Really good. He's they're all funny as always.
Rob is considered the voice of metal, but you've not just worked with Rob, you've worked with Ronnie as well. So you've worked with the two guys. I mean, the only other one,
Gillen as well.
Fantastic.
It's just Bruce, isn't it? Dickinson that I probably haven't had anything to do with.
I don't know whether you're missing out on much there. Apparently, he's a bit of a nice, to be honest.
Well, I'll be diplomatic, and I mean it diplomatically because I don't have any axe to grind. They weren't one of the bands I listened to, so they're not on my radar. I did have the pleasure of working with Nico on a project. He was ace. It was really good fun. But yeah, I've never really been a Maiden fan, so it just hasn't been anything that I would be that upset about losing out on. But Gillan was the first rock voice I ever heard because he was Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar, and we battered that album to death when I was growing up. So that was an odd one. And Ronnie and Rob and Glenn Hughes as well. I mean, just insane singers. All of them.
Is Glenn out of all of them? I've spoken to Glenn before, and he just strikes me as a lovely fella. Is he the one you'd work with again in a heartbeat?
I'd work with all of them if I could. Ronnie would have been the one actually, because he was just so powerful. He was a force of nature. He was a pocket powerhouse. His lyrics came from the heart. He wasn't trying to be clever. He just wrote stories. And then he wrote melodies to go with them. And then he delivered. And it was like, fuck. I've got one handwritten set of lyrics. I was showing Mariana the other day. I was going through some old files and I've got a set of handwritten lyrics from what was at the time called Rock and Roll Jesus, but it had to be changed to Rock and Roll Angel. So I've got the original things. And they were just literally written on the back of a packing slip for some gear we were having delivered to the studio. All of them were just fantastic. I mean, Ian's got a different voice. Rob's got a different range and a massive Queen fan. So we always try to hit the "what would Freddie do" thing. And Ronnie was he was really the voice. So they all just did stuff so differently, but their professionalism. I suppose professionalism probably isn't even something that they would consider. It's just, Ronnie once said, it's my job. I sing. I'm the singer in the band. I better be good. So I will make sure that I'm able to sing. So he sang at every opportunity. He did 2 days on, I think he probably balked at 3 days towards the end, but he would do 5 nights a week if he could. You know, he was just ultimately totally in control of what he did. And they're all the same. They've been doing it for so long, they don't know anything else. And
it's interesting, though, Mike, the Vivian Campbell has rarely had anything nice to say, all things considered, about Dio. I mean, he's the guy who wrote Holy Diver and shit, like, wrote the music. I mean, a bit like Stuart. Yeah. He's the Stuart to Dio.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you understand his perspective at all after spending so much time with Ronnie?
Yeah, I mean, I always say I'm lucky I've worked with these people in the twilight years of their careers, because I can imagine how they could have been at the height of all of the drugs and the drink and the fame and youth. If you look back to like 96 with the Filth guys, that they could have easily 30 years later been a pleasant band, still creating incredible stuff like the Uriah Heeps and the Sabbaths and the Priests of this world as a single unit. I mean, again, Maiden, they've had their face changes a bit. Probably the least out of all of them. I still think they've got one guitarist too many.
It's
almost like a tribute show.
Yeah, Yannick could probably a lovely guy, and let's face it, he's written some of their better songs of the post millennium. But if he disappeared tomorrow, most of the fans wouldn't give a shit.
No, exactly. So I'm sort of like, I can see why Ronnie and Vivian would have fallen out, because it's an incredibly emotive subject, songwriting. Because it's even more so today, because nobody gets paid. Well, people get paid royalties, but on what? You know, when you used to make records, you'd go, I'll settle for 3/4 of a point. You know, this might sell hundreds of thousands. Great. Nowadays, points don't mean anything. Songwriting
are bullshit.
Yeah, exactly. So songwriting is where it's at, and if you feel you've been fucked over on songwriting, it really hurts.
Yeah, so and that's been some of the issue with the Cradle guys, you know, and that's It's I mean, you've got to look at Paul Allender. I mean, he's driving a truck in the Midwest of the bloody United States at the moment.
Wow.
You know, that's where he's ended up. It's a hell of a long way from where he started. And with the talent that he's got.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's horrible. I think the business always gets in the way. I mean, you know, that biblical saying, money is the root of all evil, every fucking time. I made peace years ago that I will. Well, I think having a near-death experience does it to you. You're like, okay, I get that now, that you can't take it with you. So try and enjoy life as much as you can. I'm going to sound like the keyboard player from Spinal Tap now. Have a good time all the time. But you know, it's true, isn't it? You just do get through life without. What are the 3 things? There's a mixing guy out in Nashville, and he just said, Don't cheat, don't lie, and do what you said you were going to fucking do. And if you get on going through life like that, you probably have friends at the end and have had a good life experience. And I mean, my thing is to try and leave a legacy of stuff that people will love for years. And so far, I've done that. Yeah, absolutely. I'm really proud of what I've done. And I remember being able to give my kids and Mariana, when I mixed the final Black Sabbath show for record and for cinema, when the vinyl got mastered, my friend was mastering it, and he said, what do you want to put on the run out? You know, any engravings? And I said, I don't know. He goes, do you want to ask the band? I went, it's just, no. I said, well, my favourite track on the album is Dirty Women. It's fucking awesome. It's one of the best pieces of Tony playing in years. I said, can you just put Mike.X for MZZ, AJE and JIE, and it was like Mariana and my Beautiful. 2 kids, and it's engraved in there. It's only on the European versions, and I gave them to them for Christmas. And I said, and Tony had signed them as well, but I said, check the run out group, and they were like, fuck, this is amazing. And it's like, it's just pride in being able to do that, getting Andrew, my oldest son, to meet Ozzy, just brilliant. It just things that you can do that make you feel, well, something I've done has changed people's life for the better. And, with everything I went through 9 years ago, when I came through it, I went out to New York to do a Black Sabbath convention to coincide with the final 2 dates they were going to play at Madison Square Garden.
Mm-hmm.
And I was shitting myself because I'd been through nervous breakdown, anxiety, some horrendous stuff. And this mate said, we want to get you up on stage to talk about your career. And I'm like, fuck off. I said, wow. I'm too nervous. And he got me up there. He said, don't worry, we've got you. And it was cathartic. And I was able to share my story. And I was there for a week. And all through that week, I was bumping into Sabbath fans in New York, all saying, thank you so much for everything you've done for us. And it's like, fuck, it's a heavy weight to carry, but it makes you think, yeah, I'm making a difference. And that's why I'm always very reticent to throw people under the bus too much, because, I'll make jokes about what people have done, but I can't knock the fact that they've made a difference too. But again, once it gets down to unfair treatment with money, that sucks. And there's a root cause to it. And I think other people are complicit in it as well. And, it's the Janine, isn't it? Telling the lead singer that they're the reason that the band is successful. So there's always some little devil on their shoulder, that, the nasty conscience telling them to fucking do it on their own.
Well, I don't know better, Mike, I don't, and believe me, I don't, but I think that's what happened with Cradle. And it's so bloody sad that it happened because Paul Lender's inclusion after the fact, from MIDI, and of course he was a part of the original lineup, and I'll learn more this week from Paul Ryan about what their co-contribution was, how they wrote together this sort of thing. But mate, after really your involvement with the band, it really just became Danny and the Filth, and the group is just... It's really I call it a legacy act, but to be frank, I'm being kind. It's Danny in particular bringing in, I think he's got an Eastern European guitarist. Manowar did the same thing, and you don't have to be a genius to work out, to your exact point there about money. You can pay unders for certain people from certain for people from certain regions, because there's just not that equivalency there. You get people from the Anglosphere, as I call it. You got to pay them at an equivalency. Yeah. Outside of that, it's all fair game. Okay. Yeah. But something else I want to, give you, some feedback on is you're damn bloody right, mate. You have made a difference to people's lives. I've said it to Chris Bell, Nigel Wingrove, Stu, Nick. If I ever spoke to Les, I'd say the same thing. I'd probably even say it to Danny, but just not as enthusiastically. I mean, if you didn't do what you are doing, people's lives wouldn't be as fulfilling as what they are right now. And that's such an important point, because this music, it's a confidant, it's a friend, it's a light in dark times.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that early on,
Yeah, you can. A friend of mine, they're an engineering couple. They're hilarious. Avril McIntosh and Andy Bradfield are a pair of engineers that I know, and I first saw Avril McIntosh's name as assistant on "Waking Up the Neighbours" by Bryan Adams. She was Clear Mountain's assistant for that record, and she's a friend of mine, and we talk about stuff. And her husband's a brilliant engineer too, and we were chatting about stuff, and they put something up on Facebook once about they were remixing one of the Marillion albums, the Fish Era Marillion, and I said, "This is fucking brilliant. This is amazing." Didn't know you were working with him, so we got talking and everything. Anyway, they brought out the surround remix of Fugazi. Now, Fugazi was the second album that Marillion did before they hit big with Misplaced Childhood, which was the one with Kaylee on it. It was a real concept album, and it was stunning. But Fugazi was an album that, it turns out, had so many problems making it. It reminded me of what was going on with Dusk, not Dusk, Cruelty. It was one of those where nothing went according to plan. The money side of things was awful. They were being forced into a situation to record it when they should have been resting. There was all this stuff. There were record company deadlines. But the point I'm getting to isn't that similarity. It was when they said, you've got to check this out. We really value your opinion as a fan as to what we've done to it. And I listened to it and I rang her up. I said, all I can think about is a family holiday when we went to Lake Geneva, because that was what I was listening to on my Walkman back in 1984. I said, I don't care what you've done to it. It's just taken me back to my childhood. And they were like, that's what we want to hear. They hadn't destroyed it. I mean, there were a few keyboard warriors who were going on about the fucking crossfade between two tracks and all this shit. But anybody that's a real fan just went, wow, thank God. And that's the way I feel about the new remix of Animals. It's actually really good because James Guthrie is a god of recording and mixing. But for me, it's what the music does to you emotionally. I can listen to part 9 of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and all I can remember is the final part of the train journey down from in the Rockies, coming down into Vancouver, because that's what I was listening to when that happened. So it's an incredible time machine. It's a transportation device, music, and it's supposed to elicit an amazing emotional reaction from you. And we are in a very, very it's the Spider-Man thing, isn't it? It's like with great power comes great responsibility. We have a responsibility to make this shit good. And to be a reflection of what the artist is trying to say at the time.
Talking about making shit good, though, and sorry to interrupt if I am. But,
that's all right.
How did you not throttle Rick Rubin? Because I can't stand the bastard. Seriously, how on earth he's mad? I mean, Kerry King has said everything that needs to be said about the guy, but clearly,
well,
I'll hand over to you.
I think. Oh God, what's his name? His name's gone out of my head now. Right, Mariana's going to remember. Slipknot singer.
I'm not a fan.
Corey Taylor.
Corey Taylor, yeah.
Oh, yeah, you've both agreed with me. That's good. Corey Taylor. When we were writing 13 and we were like having some misgivings about why he was never turning up, Corey Taylor did that stand-up show where someone asked him what it was like working with Rick Rubin. And all I'll say is I think he was spot on. I got on all right with Rick as far as anybody can get on all right with Rick. There were some moments of hilarity where the humour didn't transcend across the Atlantic. Let's just put it that way. I took some notes at the time. I was writing a daily journal. And I can't find it because I probably did it on some iPad that Apple stopped making the software or something. But I remember writing stuff down and in a very positive way absorbing the situation of being in a room with that happening, because it was a huge album for me. It was if The Devil You Know was highly anticipated, it was the mumblings of, oh my God, Sabbath are getting back together with Ronnie. That was never going to happen. I mean, unfortunately, Eagles had already taken Hell Freezes over as a title. So, when we were stum for about a year before the announcement was made that Sabbath were reforming. We'd known about that for a long time.
Is that with Ozzy or with
Ozzy? Sorry, yeah. So that literally a year before, it was more than a year actually. The contact was made about Ozzy would be interested in working with the guys again. So we'd gone a year into trying to find this process that would work, because again, Ozzy's got a successful solo career, and Tony had done his own things, and it was about getting these people who had last been in the band together properly back in 1978, I think.
Correct. Yep.
So it was a long time. And I have to say that was equally as fun as the Devil You Know sessions, because they're just nutcases. A lot of them. They're all really funny. every single member of Sabbath and like Vinny Appice and Brad Wilk, just insanely funny people. So such a comfortable environment to be in. And I would say we all felt like there was going to be a visit from the headmaster or something every time Rick turned up. He's got his... It's funny because I was watching one of his interviews this morning about this new book of his, which I think should be subtitled things I read in a fortune cookie. In fact, I used that at one point in one of the sessions. He came out with some comment about something, and it was really, if you feel you're going in a certain direction and it doesn't feel like it's the right direction, please feel free to change direction. And I just giggled, and Tony looked at me, and I went, "Is he being horrible? Is he being at the fortune cookies again?" And he started laughing. He's an odd guy. And we watched that video on Corey Taylor. Well, Corey Taylor really fucking had a go about him, and I think it was sort of a toleration. In one respect, he did bring stuff to the party that made them think. I think Rick's I would say his main forte is putting teams together to solve problems. So at the time, I wouldn't say Sabbath had any problems. We were getting on very well as a sort of 5 people in a room working through songwriting and everything. I don't think they needed to be shown how to make an album after all this time. Tony had just gone through the cancer thing. By the time we got in the studio, he'd gone through January 2012 to August before he was sort of through the main treatments. He was then having to have infusions every 2 months to boost his antibodies. So by the time we got in the studio, he wasn't at 100% fighting fit, but he certainly was at 100% playing and being him. But to get the album done, because it had already been going on for about 18 months, we did it. There was no fighting what was going on. It was almost a case of it'll get made in spite of any of this stupidity that goes on. Because there are things that Rick brought to the table. He changed the course of it. It could have been a continuation of The Devil You Know. That may not have suited what... That
would have been awesome, sorry. That would have been fantastic.
I believe so. I mean, I don't know if you heard the track that Tony and I did about 18 months ago when he launched the Aftershave. It was a thing called Scent of Dark, and we got real strings on it, and it was heavy. It's just instrumental. Yeah, it's I think it's just under Iommi, Scent of Dark, and it's the video is a little bit perfume-selly, but it came about with good intentions, and it was a really heavy piece of music, and people were like, "Holy fuck, this is great." He and I write together all the time, and it's a massive thing to make it as powerful sounding as possible. And if there's an album that divided the fans, it's 13, because there are fans who wanted an original Sabbath sounding album, and there are fans who wanted to see what Sabbath would do in 2013. And to be honest, I don't think we got either. It was good songs, but I think they got lost in the machine. As Rick's always got this phrase of like, let's put it through the whatever, insert band name here, filter. So it'll be like there was a thing where he was having a songwriting meeting with the Dixie Chicks, and the 2 girls in the band with Natalie Maines was sort of talking about this song, and then the other 2 are going, "What do you think our involvement's going to be? This is personal to Natalie Maines. Like, well, let's just concentrate on good songs to start with, and then we'll put it through the Dixie Chicks filter to see what that becomes." And it's like, it's that kind of thing. So the Sabbath filter, I think they turned it up to 11 because it was very much about how can we make it sound just like the first album.
Oh,
and
God.
you can't.
So it was like Sabbath by Sabbath, if you know what I'm saying. Like, let's cover ourselves, which ironically is what I think Cradle of Filth have been doing ever since Paul Linda stepped out of the band.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing is, you get, interestingly with Priest, because I hold them up as an example, is you've got two types of fans of Priest, possibly three. You've got the ones that love the Turbo era.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the ones that love the classic era, and you've got the ones that love the Painkiller era. And Priest covers all of those really well. But most, I would say, the most vociferous Priest fans want Priest to sound like Painkiller all the time.
Yeah.
And they're not that band. They're not
it's one album.
Yeah. They're a classic rock band, Living After Midnight, Another Thing Coming. You've got all these songs that are classic.
Yeah, and Painkiller's Scott Travis, right? That's him coming in and doing this full-on American thrash metal thing, and the guys just keeping up with him, in my opinion. Would you agree, or have I got my take on things?
I think Glenn probably had a lot to do with it. Scott and I talked about it, and he's like, I think Glenn had listened to stuff I'd done and was like, and I'm good friends with Jeff Waters from Annihilator as well, and he said around that time, he said because I think Annihilator supported Priest on the Painkiller tour,
and Pantera did too. Importantly,
that's it.
You're right. Yeah.
So he was, he's a massive fan of Priest, and he was like, he said it was almost like Glenn wanted to do something so different to Turbo that they went that far in the opposite direction. And again, I said it earlier, if a band's got a career that lasts 30, 40, 50 years, then you're going to have lots and lots of things that are different. I mean, you listen to good old-fashioned Loverboy and Bohemian Rhapsody, you wouldn't think they were the same band. The only cohesive thing there is Freddie.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that gets back to that person that's selling and fronting the band. I think in Tony's case, Tony is really the sound of Sabbath. He's the sound that makes people go, fuck, that's Iommi. I don't think Dream Theater have got an identity. They're all, unless it's poor old what's his name's vocals, which are
James LaBrie.
They're not in the top 10 vocalists, I wouldn't say. But then you've got these other things where it's like you listen to Ronnie, you listen to Ian, you listen to Rob. It's instantly recognizable who that is. Oh, and Bruce. They're instantly recognizable. These bands. Because of that, and that's why I think when you get someone like Ripper Owens coming in and to Priest's camp, they become Priest doing Priest.
That's an interesting episode, isn't it? Because they were the one band that had a fighting chance with classic band that had a fighting chance in that era. I'm talking about the 90s, which was bloody awful for metal, as you remember. Well, it really came back on the back of, there was two bands. I mean, people argue about Sepultura, but they fell apart. But there was Devin Townsend and Strapping Young Lad, and there's Cradle of Filth. They were the two bands that in the doldrums actually started to spearhead metal out of it. Yeah,
exactly. God, I'd love to do an album with Townsend. He's brilliant.
He's a genius. Yeah, he's a genius.
He's funny as well. God. I mean, he's a bit like the guys from Opeth. They do this thing where they can transcend that heavy, growly, double kick shit and go full prog on you. And it's seamless. That's what Filth could sound like. If Filth had the sonics of Blackwater Park by Opeth, it would be like, wow, that would knock on a few doors.
Well, what I said to Stuart was that ultimately what happened was with Iron Maiden bringing in Blaze, they lost their way completely, let's face it. Wrong vocals, wrong song, bloody awful, wasn't it? Okay. And
it doesn't get any better either, does he?
Well, no. And I feel for the guy because he's just been thrust into the limelight in a way that you would never want him to be, given the timbre of his voice and even the personality that he's got. You need a really bold personality. But Cradle stepped into that void. They were Iron Maiden for that era. Stuart bought in. Stuart was the one guy that unlocked new wave of British heavy metal within the black metal parameters.
Yeah.
And it just hasn't been done again. It's very weird what happened around that band. That part of the band that you were such a crucial cog to ensure was realised, the sound was realised. None of it has ever happened again. It was like this zeitgeist that just went whoosh. But we still got it.
There's something weird about that early 2000s time, isn't there, as well, where a lot of industrial influences came into the punky side of metal. It was like this sudden access to technology. It's like Kill to This. I remember I worked with them on their second album. I'm seeing Mark in a couple of weeks. I'm doing a university research thing for him.
Wow. Okay.
And it's really funny. I remember the stories of the first album, which was Voodoo Vice and something. I can't remember. The second one was Trinity. That's the one I worked on. Yeah. And I remember
that's a good album, by the way, Trinity.
Yeah, it's good.
I quite like
it?
that one. Yeah.
Well, the connection there is that the bass player on that album ended up playing keyboards with Phil.
So the female.
Yeah, what's her name?
She ended up playing Caroline. So she ended up playing live keyboards, didn't she?
Yes, yeah, she was on. She was on a couple of tours. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, that was funny as well, because talk about the Dr. Midnight coming in. I'm not sure she appeared on Trinity at all.
Right, yeah, okay.
But so the first album, I remember Sneap had been recording it with Minor about doing the full on heavy shit, and then the mix came, and suddenly Mark comes in with all these bloody samplers and synths and things and sequencers, and he's like, "What the fuck's all this shit?" Mm-hmm. So the next album was he was like, "You've got to have this done ahead of time." So Mark was traveling back up north where he lived and making sure that we had up to date stuff. But it was very, very much of that time. It was like you couldn't make an album unless there was a fucking drum loop backing a real drummer and
very
stuff like that.
New metal stuff going on, wasn't it?
Wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Linkin Park pretty much defined the ultimate, what that could have been. And I actually loved what they did with the two different styles of vocals. I mean, Chester fucking rocked. And he had a fucking amazing voice. And Shinoda did, but in a different way. It was almost like when you hear Rage Against the Machine compared to Prophets of Rage. I think the Prophets guys, the Cypress Hill, I guess it was Cypress Hill, wasn't it, or whatever. They felt like they suited the groove better than Zach. I loved the Prophets of Rage stuff.
Well, they couldn't get along with Zach. I mean, the issue there was personal. I don't think it was musical. They couldn't stand each other there for a period of time. And but just talking about Rage, look, I often felt that, and I still feel that. Okay, so whose decision was it to bring in Brad Wilk from Rage Against the Machine to record 13?
The suggestion was Rick's. The band decided. Brad was great. We had a few people that were that auditioned, and
because Nick could have done it. To be honest, I've said the same thing to Tony from Venom.
I don't think Nick would have been right for it. Snape said to me once, he says, "You should have got the guy from Clutch." And I was like, I didn't know about him. Because Andy's got he's a good producer. He's a really good producer. And he sort of knows the stuff. I mean, I don't know if it's common knowledge, but I think one of his favourite bands is Status Quo, growing up. So he's not like this metalhead that's totally against all other kinds of music. He recognises the right person for the right job. I think Brad did a really good job. I think the problem is you don't hear what he was capable of. And that's my big issue with it.
Look, overall, I think the issue from the fans' perspective, and I've got to say I'm probably in the same camp as what the hell happened to Bill Ward, because he could have done the recording, surely. The tour, but the recording. He really, whatever he likes to say, when Ozzy was saying what had happened with Bill, he was spot on.
There was no Ozzy. Yeah, Bill wasn't in the right place to do it, and we did loads and loads and loads with him to try to bring him up to speed, but it just wasn't happening, and that tied in with Tony's cancer. Tony was like, I don't know if I'll make it another year. At the time, I think Tony had stage 3 lymphoma.
Oh wow, yeah.
So there was a big thing of like, we just need to get this record made. And eventually, I mean, I don't think there's any love lost between Bill and Sharon. I think that's well known. But everything that was said in the initial statements about why Bill wasn't there was spot on. Okay. And we, everybody gets asked about it all the time. And Bill has made his statements, and they will argue forever, and he'll do his autobiography and everything, but ultimately it just wasn't happening. And he wasn't the Bill Ward that you'd have loved from the early days.
Has he just lost it? I'm a musician. This isn't for show, by the way, but I've worked with musicians. I'm a bassist, so I turn around to the drummer and I'm like, dude, have you had too much to drink, or what the hell's going on? And then,
I think in a nutshell, that is almost it. I think Bill's sobriety ended his freedom to play. He got sober around the time of the 1983 album with Gillan, Born Again. And it's a little bit like Bonham and Mooney, incredible drummers. They did that shit because they were mostly off their head. And when you get someone who is overthinking everything, they're not free to move. They're not letting the subconscious get on with it. And I would say that there was just too much of that going on.
Well, you know what they say, don't you, about a lot of these? Sorry, just to interrupt. About a lot of the people who take drugs, the Beatles and Pink Floyd, Sabbath, all of these ones. When you're drinking, you're just thinking about your next drink. So you're just thinking about economy. So you're just thinking about the next drink from the perspective of what do I need to do to efficiently get through to this next point. Yeah. And it has this tunnel vision effect, and there is, to a point, if you're already very good at what you do, and in some cases, I'm not saying Bill's savant because he's clearly not of that sort of ilk, but I've had this conversation a lot with people. I mean, like look at Dave Mustaine ever since he stopped doing drugs and alcohol. The songwriting just isn't there. It just goes, and you're like, I wish him the best, and it's obviously the best thing for his family. And to be honest, that's what counts in life. But we as fans, we lose the bloody music. David Gilmour, same thing. It bloody happened.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I'm like, growing up, one of my favorite guitarists. He writes waltzes now.
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible.
I mean, I haven't listened to the last couple of things Roger's done, but Amused to Death was one of my favorite albums and still is.
Same.
It's fucking incredible.
Amazing.
And
amazing,
that record just, I hate the fact they fucked with it. I really do. The reissue a few years ago, they started putting in extra bloody effects that he uses live and little extra shit. And I'm like, oh, stop it. Because I always said that. It was like when someone said to me, oh, what would you like to go back and do? And I went, well, I'd love, when I was growing up, I'd love to have remixed Animals, but no, I don't want to. I'm glad that James Guthrie's done it because he's brilliant. And it's actually a really nice treatment. You get the odd little bit where the bass is playing and you hear the snare rattling. That's all there. There's extra bits of keyboard. It's a real sensitive remix. And I always say, why on earth would I want to work with Pink Floyd? They did fine without me. That's why I like them. But as soon as Gilmour and Waters stopped fighting, that was it. There was, within the band, there was no fucking spark. I went to see Floyd on the Momentary Lapse tour and the Division Bell tour.
If you did that, yeah.
But to be honest, I get more of a kick out of Waters, and I don't want to see him on this tour because I think I've seen the best tour he's ever done, and that was the Us and Them tour.
Well, he's too bitter these days. He's gone to this whole anti-Israeli thing and all the rest of it, and he's screaming at people from stage these days about you're a bigot if you support Israeli apartheid and all this bullshit. And it's like you're not even, to be honest, you're not even correct. Technically, okay, you have no understanding of Middle Eastern politics. You just think you do. You're one of them. You're like these hardcore lefty types that do that. But also, too, just understand where your audience is at. Have some self-awareness of what your audience are there to listen to. It's the same thing with that idiot from Iced Earth. It's beside the point, but that guy from Iced Earth that stormed the Capitol building, whatever their version of Parliament House is in the States. Who did that? What's his name? I can't remember his name now.
I can't remember, but I remember the story because I was listening.
John Schaefer. He did it. Yeah. But the opposite ends of the spectrum. But they forget what they're there to do, which is entertain and bring music to the people.
They've been given a privilege, haven't they? They've been put there. Some people understand it. Some people very much. I mean, I do fucking nobody can see what I'm doing, but this bollocks on stage when, they're thanks to the fans, I'm feeling it in my heart. That's got really sickly for me, as have the photos at the end of the gig where the band put their back to the audience and get a selfie. I'm so sick of that shit. But they've been put there by the fans, and a lot of people understand that, and they realise that even though they don't have to do records for the fans, they certainly don't want to shove anything in the fans' face. Because I don't know if you remember back in the early 90s, you probably don't know. There was a firm of jewellers over in the UK called Ratner's. And this guy, Gerald Ratner, was infamous for one day, because they were a high street jewellery seller. One day he did a speech to a CBI conference or something, and they said, he says, people often ask me how I can keep the costs down, prices low on all my jewellery. And he goes, basically because it's a load of shit. And within a month, his business had gone because the public said, well, then you're calling us cunts, aren't you, for buying your stuff? Jesus. And that's what you can do by saying the wrong thing. Because if your loyal supporters suddenly think that you've been taking them for a ride, they'll turn on you really quickly. So, and it's even worse in these days of internet. It's awful. So I think people have got a responsibility to either, it's the fans' responsibility not to react and take give people shit. I would never go on a forum and diss Gilmore. He's got plenty of fans that love what he does. I choose not to think it's as good as his heyday. But if it moves people, great. But I think you're not a real fan if you're going to tear them apart online. I think that's terrible. And it's got vitriolic. Poor old Andy Sneap's got so much shit for stepping in to help Glenn out on live dates.
Is that right?
Oh, he's had everything thrown at him.
The blabbermouth forums, that bullshit.
Everything,
stuff.
Yeah, Sneap's useless. Get KK in. It's like, oh, fucking hell.
I meant to ask you that when you mentioned him first. Have you read KK's book? And if you have read it,
no.
Can you? Yeah, I've read his book.
Yeah,
and look, it's whoever's book you read. Like I read whatever the drummer's name is from Aerosmith, and I finished that. And I was like, "Fuck, he's been
Joey
hard
Kramer.
done by." Yeah. I was like, "Fuck, he's been hard done by," and I hated Joe Perry and Tyler there for a bit, as you tend to do. But then I realized, fucking hell, they're just telling you. It's his narrative. They're telling you their story. Okay, so KK's book is very much a narrative, but he talked about how he went into quite a lot of detail about how in the mid-'80s there, when the band started getting really popular on MTV, that Glenn dyed his hair blonde and all of this sort of stuff, and that he was locked out of the soloing side of things early on. And some of that stuff you can identify with, but you think, well, the band is successful because of the chemistry that brought it to fame. Okay, so KK, I never felt, as likely you didn't either, that KK was diminished because he didn't do solos. I always felt he was like the in Australia, it's not Angus that's revered, it's Malcolm.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely correct.
I was thinking it must have been the same thing for KK, but he didn't feel that way.
No, and I can imagine what it's like within the inner workings where, You've got the strength of personality that Glenn has, and ultimately also you get someone that's willing to take on the role of driving the juggernaut, which Glenn would do. And I'm not saying anything specific because I don't know the ins and outs, and I hope nobody ever takes any offense. But when someone is willing to do the hard work, other people are willing to let them do that. So if the say in Glenn's case, he's driving that machine to get these albums made in the best way possible, as far as he is concerned, and he's not getting, maybe he's not letting people in to, I mean, I found it hard to push back on him at times. But ultimately he knows that band. He's been involved in all the success. So in the absence of any kind of real pushback or a united pushback, then he's going to get away with it. And I can imagine after a few years that gets pretty fucking draining, you know, and there are always going to be things where you don't know the full ins and outs of what's gone on, and you always hear one side and you hear the other side. I take a really pragmatic approach. I've never met KK. He was out just before I started working with them. I've heard from people that work with him that he's a lovely guy. I think he's getting some pretty bad advice not to just let stuff go, because he's not doing the legacy any good at all. I think the silence of Judas Priest was an honourable thing to do. I think they tried to keep it stum. Glenn didn't know. Well, he probably should have known earlier that he wasn't going to be able to tour. He dropped it on Andy right at the last minute, and Andy stepped in, and they were able to do that. And you could just do without the fighting in the background, because nobody really cares. That's why I laugh off the Roger Waters thing. It's like, oh God, it's them again. Someone told me, and I believe him, because it's he's high up in one of the organisations that had a lot to do with it. When Pink Floyd had their exhibition 4 or 5 years ago at the Victoria and Albert Museum, apparently, literally a week before it was due to open, Gilmour threw his toys out the pram because Roger had gone on record saying, well, I've been round the exhibition and it's quite plain that I was the creative force in this band. And Gilmour reacted, well, that's it, I'm not letting this exhibition go ahead. And someone said, you know he's baiting you. He's been doing it all your life. Just ignore him, for God's sake, you know. And I should imagine it is probably pretty difficult to do. We've all got family fallouts and people we have to deal with. I think maybe because I'm in production and 98% of it is psychology, you just learn to see both sides and work the problem. It's very rare that you get to the point where you can't do the full Kofi Annan and get the problem resolved. And when you can't, you bat it back at management and tell them it's their problem. But, you know, it's insane, isn't it? It's passion that fuels it. But yeah, it's a real difficult one to navigate. And when they all start doing tell-all books, it's like, oh, God, you know, you're not really doing anybody any favours, are you? You're just opening up the gossip mongers. It'd be nice if I got a Cradle of Filth record to ruin. I did say that to Danny. I said, next time you think you're doing a record, give me a call.
I don't know why you wouldn't. That's what I can't understand. It's like, I
think, we may have touched on it a couple of hours ago, but I think there's a chance there that he's just comfortable working with the people around him. Maybe. It's cool, you know. People find people that they like, that get the job done the way they like it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if it's, I wouldn't imagine there's so much of a passion there in terms of art, the way that there used to be with Nick and Stu. So, you know, it's more about just maybe getting back on the machine and making another record, and because that's what he loves to do. It just may not be as passionate as it used to be.
Well, they don't hit you the same way. I
haven't listened to anything since Cruelty. I mean, I did listen to the EP, but yeah, it was like, I didn't follow them because it really, again, it wasn't really the stuff that I enjoyed. When I heard a couple of things and I was like, I went to see them. God, would that have been about 4 or 5 years ago?
What do you think?
I didn't think that they'd done much since they did. I can't remember which song. I think they did Cruelty Brought the Orchids. I may be wrong, but they certainly did something or a couple of things from the albums I was involved in. I was like, these sound great. These are really good. I didn't think the songwriting was as accomplished. And it wasn't a bitterness at all because I have no axe to grind. It didn't hit me the way that the earlier stuff did. It had become exactly. It had become something that was just like, it wasn't as original as what they did. You said it earlier. They set themselves apart from everything else that was going on back in that time, and there's a laziness in. We're all influenced by something, but there's a laziness with people who think they can just outright copy stuff that's going on. And I'm not saying Danny's copying it. What I'm saying is other people started to copy what Cradle of Filth were, and there becomes this huge morass of sound-alikes and lookalikes. I mean, this is the big joke about the heavy metal posters where you can't read one band name because they're all in that same
Look at the
script.
festival dates these days. It's a lot like that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you sort of go through this thing and you go, I don't know anymore. It's getting old as well. It all sounds the same to me, because a lot of it is the same. What I hook onto is what's the story that's being told? What can I get my teeth into? What is it that makes me want to listen to that again? And if there's none of that going on, then it is just an excuse to go out and be in a circle pit. And I don't do that.
Yeah. No, I don't either. It's boring as shit. I've been to a few. I mean, I get access to all these festivals as a journo, and you go to them, and look, I'm complimentary in the moment, and look, I'll name the bands, like Monomath and Sabaton and this sort of thing, but they can't hit me the same way because maybe I'm too old. That's another thing. I appreciate that. I totally get it. Maybe if you're 15 or something like that and you hear Sabaton for the first time, you're like, wow, here we go. And they're great guys. Spoken to the guys a bunch of times, Swedish band. They put on a pretty good show, but does it hit me the same way as watching Cradle of Filth in 1997 in a dirty club in Sydney? No. Of course it doesn't. It can't, because you can't recreate that era.
No,
you can't sort of you can't recreate that burgeoning sense of what's going to happen next, because we know what happens next. With the internet these days, we know what happens next. And I spoke to the guys that, In Flames at all, the band In Flames.
I know of them. Yeah.
I mean, they helped write that metalcore book.
Right.
Them and At the Gates, the other Swedish band. The Swedish band did a tremendous job, such a great job, But there was a period of time there where the book was written effectively. And Carcass, the British band, Bill Steer. Nick, I think, wanted to join Carcass there for a bit, but what's the bass player vocalist name? He's not a very nice guy, I've got to say. I've spoken to him before, and he was one of my least favourite interview subjects, I've got to say.
Fuck.
He's just one of those guys, you meet some people and they're sort of not vibing on the fact that they're doing interviews because they rarely do them and they don't like doing them, and there's friends in the studio and stuff. But the point is that we as older fans, and you as a bloke who's been integral in bringing these sounds to us as the fans, we tend to sort of pick our era from myself, from my perspective as a fan, we pick our era, and that's where we identify with, and it's very hard to get outside of that. Okay, it's very hard to get outside of that. But then I also think, quite sincerely, that the work that you were a part of is some of the best work we'll ever hear from the genre, extreme metal.
I agree. I think it had something about it that people still cared. I'm very, very protective of the craft of making records and making albums, not least being a massive, massive thing that is, it's not like making a 3-minute single. It's not like doing a single like song, even if it's a 5-minute song, whatever. Making an album is a real investment of your heart and soul. And we did great work on those records. And I still take that sensibility. I mean, I'm control surface, speakers, monitors over to one side. I hate looking at a computer screen. It's what's coming through the speakers is really important. I'm lucky because I still worked on tape up until, I would imagine 2 or 3 years beyond From the Cradle. That was all tape. And it makes you work in a certain way, and you listen, and you become invested in the project. And there's not enough of that nowadays. There are some people that do it. Jay Ruston is very, very much.
He's fantastic.
He's awesome. He's a really good guy. And we've chatted about it, and he's like, and Joe Barresi as well. Joe's so old school.
Yeah, you mentioned him earlier. Great guy too. Yeah,
he's awesome. Yeah. It was really nice last summer. I got to hang out with him for most of the day. A mate of mine and I were over in California, and we just hung out for the day, talking shit, because we'd never had the opportunity to just hang out together. It was always passing at NAMM and stuff. But they're people, Jay and Joe are people that make records without worrying about tech. And I'm the same. I'm all about getting a band in together and playing and making them feel part of this procedure that is that's about creating this this marking of a particular point in time that everybody's emotionally attached to. The idea of cross-Atlantic sending of files and, not being in a room together, doing records piecemeal is horrible. It's an awful, awful thing. And that's not making records. That is documenting a bunch of musicians playing separately and correcting it all and making it sound as loud as possible and making it sound as in time as possible. Very few people can get away with it and do a good job. And there's a whole generation of people who have never actually touched an analog EQ. They've never properly moved microphones around. They've never actually had to work on material that has been recorded by real human beings together. And the emotion that comes across when a band is working in a room together, like you mentioned about the Filth guys having rehearsal photos and stuff. I doubt there's any photos of the recordings at DET because I don't think anybody bothered taking cameras in. We'd have all had to take in our little 35mm cameras and get them developed. Yeah. And that's boring. It was pre-camera phone. So there's a lot of there's a lot of rehearsal that goes into making great art. I've got a fantastic photo of Ronnie Geezer, Tony and Vinny on the stage in this place called Mates in Burbank, where we went and played the album for a week before we went in to record The Devil You Know back in England, because they wanted to make sure that what we'd written could be played, and they routined the songs for a week so that we were ready to go in and record that album. And it's a huge, huge difference in investment of your time and your emotion when you make records properly. And I think that's why Dusk stands out so much, because it was obviously massively important to the band at the time. it was the album that got them launched into the stratosphere. And, no small part of it is down to Kit Walvin for putting up with it and doing a fucking fantastic job and teaching me loads and dragging me along to make a contribution to it. And we kind of took that into Cruelty, but just as normal, usual shit happens, it got screwed up by everything else around it. And sometimes you can't avoid what the inevitable is, which is the band were going to break up into or fragment. And unfortunately, that's when the strongest person left takes over the reins. And there never will be another one of those like that because the players aren't there anymore, which is a shame. And sometimes
I'd love to know. Sorry, you go. Sorry, you go.
I was going to say that sometimes you wonder if that it was meant to be. That was their few years together where it was going to be the golden years, and then it was never going to be reclaimed. You know, some bands stay together far too long. I mean, I never listened to Aerosmith past probably
Rocks.
Get a Grip.
Get a grip.
Well, I mean,
Okay,
I liked Pump. But then Get a Grip was like, oh, this is actually quite good. Then it was like, actually, no, I'm not listening to this that much. Pump's better.
What was the album after? What was the album after Get a Grip? The 1996 album, 1997 album.
Nine Lives.
Called? 9 Lives. That was all right. That was the last one I got too. I'm with you. Right. And then after that, I was like, when that bloody Armageddon song came out, I was like, I'm out of here. This is garbage.
Didn't that coincide with poor old Bruce Fairbairn dying? Didn't he?
It may have, yeah.
But then maybe the last album he may have done was Pump. I can't remember, but he did a great job on the Van Halen album, Balance. That was a fucking good sounding album. Really.
But they broke apart in that bloody thing there because Sammy and Van Halen. I mean, I'm a Sammy fan. I've got to say, I like Sammy. I think he's a tremendous guy.
Me too. Yep. Absolutely.
Van Halen struggled with alcoholism through that entire period and probably was intolerable to be around through most of it.
Oh, well, I tell you, the book. Have you read the book by the then manager, Noel something?
No, I should. Yeah.
Well. Oh, let me find it because I had it. I listened to audio books. I think it was Noel. I think it was called Running with the Devil. Let's have a look. It's in my library somewhere. Yeah, Noel Monk. He was the guy that managed Van Halen all the way through from the early days up until
Monk.
I think it was the end of 1984, and he got unceremoniously fired by Alex.
He did a lot of the firing, didn't he? That poor bastard. He was the one who had to bloody. But when you say he got fired by him, I reckon he was just the guy who had to deliver the news. It wasn't that he was.
Maybe. I think. Listen to the book. I won't say anymore.
Okay.
I mean, again, it's someone's own perspective, but this is them getting their first deal. I think it was something to do with the label. He was a production manager or something, and the label put him in to get involved. I listened to that, and I also listened to Ted Templeman's books. And independently, they're very interesting. And yeah, I think Sammy got a raw deal. I think Roth got a raw deal, but he was a prat as well. So
yeah, he just comes across as a wanker, doesn't he, for the most part? Whereas Sammy comes across as a guy who's actually trying to make things work. And the thing I like about Sammy, he had his own career beforehand.
Yeah.
So he didn't need to join Van Halen. He was already pretty successful, but by going in, and I love that, OU812.
Oh, that and 5150 was stunning.
Yeah, they're my two favorite albums. Yeah, of them, from them anyway. Yeah.
It's but we, obviously we can't gloss over Van Halen 3, can we? Or maybe we should.
Oh, it's all right. 1984 and Van Halen 3, they're good albums, but you've got to like that brown sound unto itself. Yeah. That guitar tone that Van Halen.
But 3 was the one with fucking Sharon, wasn't it?
Oh, Van Halen 3, sorry. Yeah.
That one, No, I thought you'd miss. Yeah. That was, sorry. I mean, I played that once and I don't think I've ever played it again.
It just didn't work. I did buy it. I bought it when it came out.
Yeah, me too.
And I was a huge Extreme fan. So I bought it and I listened to it. And then, that song, Must Be Some Kind of Love Where We Can Get It Right, that sort of thing. And I thought, wow, they're going for a full-on 90s MTV thing going here. And I can get behind it. At the time I liked it. It just hasn't aged well.
No.
That's what it is,
exactly.
It's a grungy sound. It's got a grunge sort of a Soundgarden-y thing going on at the time, I thought.
It's a real follow-on to Balance, isn't it? Because that kind of it was that. That's where they were going with Balance, really strip the sound down. And
and that was Sammy said not to do that. That was a big issue because Van Halen wanted to go in that direction, and we've got to compete with Nirvana, man. It's like you don't, because your fan base is completely different. Yeah. But I think, you and I were around back then. The kids these days don't understand how much pressure. I spoke to George Lynch about this. George Lynch got so much pressure from his record label. He had to release an album under the Lynch Mob moniker, which for all intents and purposes aped Limp Bizkit. This is George Lynch, right?
Well,
from Dokken.
Tony had to release an album called Seventh Star, Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. It was meant to be a solo album, and it was the one that Glenn Hughes sang on. And the record label insisted on it being a Black Sabbath album.
I spoke to Bob Daisley about this. Bob Daisley's Australian. I spoke to Bob about this, and it was. Look, I think Tony was detached by then. Would you agree, or did you? He sort of got to the point where he's just like, whatever,
Yeah, probably fighting to save the band again. I don't know what to do. When you think about the timings, it's like I don't even know who else was on the album. Probably Rondinelli, maybe. I can't remember.
Probably, I'd say.
There was, he'd lost his mates. There was no other Sabbath people there at all. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And those are dark periods, and you think, God, should they have gone into semi-retirement for a bit? But they don't, because that's all they know.
Yeah,
and then it becomes a piece of history that people have very, very strong opinions about.
Well, I suppose if Def Leppard they wouldn't release Slang from 1996. There's all these albums that come out in the wrong era. They're the right band, wrong era sort of thing, And that
Love and Hate Collide song is awesome.
Yeah, that's off the other one. That's off the one before that, whatever that was called. Yeah,
that was a best of, wasn't it, or something with a single?
It had like a chick on a mirror that looked like a skull on the front of it. I can't remember the name of it. I thought that was a great track, actually. Though.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, great song.
It's just one of those things, and it comes around again. We're now 2 generations since the 80s. It's like, fuck.
Well, I tell you what I don't like, Mike, because I don't like when artists disown an era of their catalogue like Celtic Frost, for example, like Tom G. Fisher or Warrior, whatever he's Tom G. Fisher, but, Tom G. Warrior. Totally disowned Cold Lake from 1988. It's one of my favourite albums from them. It's actually my gateway into the band.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what's wrong with it? Okay, the photos are ridiculous. I'll agree with him on that, but they look like Poison or something. But
this is that. It's the Gerald Ratner thing, the jeweler I was talking about. It's like you're basically saying that your fans were all wrong and they were stupid. You can't do that to people. You've got to own your past and stand by what you've done. And if you've done something horrible, be apologetic and actually definitely remorseful. But you've got to own it. You've got to say, I'm not trying to say that was shit and I was in a bad place. We did that shit. Sorry. There's a lot of people that laugh about it. I'm sure Ozzy just laughs about that video with him. Was it Crazy Train with the fucking big shoulder pads? Really?
Well, he's even worse. He's tried to. He hasn't remastered The Ultimate Sin. He's totally ignored that album.
I know.
And Bob Daisley wrote that bloody thing. And it's like, mate, you can't just say that to fans like me. And that's my favorite album from him, by the way. You can't just say we're wrong for our preference, our taste. You put it out there. Stand by it. J.K. Lee still played on it. You had great musicians on it. Phil Soussan ended up playing bass on it. Bob wrote it, but Phil Soussan, who's in last in line, with the Dio thing.
I saw them a couple of years ago. They're great.
Yeah, exactly. And who's the drummer who's long since passed away?
Vinny was the drummer in. Vinny played on the last In Line tour. Vinny Appice.
I'm trying to think of the drummer who was in Ozzy's band there for about two or three albums. It wasn't Tommy Aldridge, the one after him. Sorry, any other time I'd remember it, and people who listen to this will be saying it's this person. You should know. But
and we're not checking Google because we're determined we haven't got Alzheimer's. So
exactly.
it'll pop into our head at some point.
yeah. But Ozzy's disowned that album completely, which brings me to another point that I should have asked earlier. But what was your perception on dealing and your experience dealing with Sharon?
Well, she was funny. She's a tyrant. We did a lot of the songwriting. For the first, we were backwards and forwards between Tony's studio and Ozzy's studio, and Ozzy's was in his house. So we had, we were in the basement at Ozzy's a lot, and Sharon was great. I mean, she knew that the band were doing a good job of doing their thing. They were getting back together. They were negotiating a whole songwriting situation. Get four people in the room again together who have maybe not worked together in this situation properly with a real end in sight, because they'd talked about getting back together after the first reunion at the end of the 90s. They'd had a couple of abortive sessions of trying to write new songs. It just wasn't right for them. But this time it was like Oz was fully committed. Tony Geese and Bill Wall fully committed. So let's see how this goes. And she really left us alone to do it. She popped her head in from time to time. And she's funny. I didn't have any run-ins because she knew, I guess, that they were doing the right thing. They were getting on with what they do as a band. They didn't need managing. So I remember because she was doing the America's Got Talent stuff at the time, and I remember having some hilarious conversations about some of the contestants, like the guy that would self-flagellate, and whack his balls and all this. And, she's got a wicked sense of humour. But over a 2-year period, really, I didn't see that much of her. So all I know is that she's a very, very strong businesswoman and gets stuff done. And that's why I think she was sort of the point person on the project, her and her organisation, because it's a big organisation and they do get stuff done. And I think in the run-up to it, they were doing an incredible job of doing a teaser campaign with little snippets from the studio and, not releasing any music, but it was like, this is coming. By the time 13 got released, it was really anticipated. And I think at the time to hit number one in 33 countries was massive for a band. It's that's not an insignificant thing for what's effectively a legacy act, isn't it?
Well, I think it was an important last word to have from the band for the fans' perspective. I think the Bill Ward thing aside, which you've answered,
I think it's that smarts with people.
It was more that look. I got to be honest. At the time, it's the reason why I didn't watch the show in Brisbane. Here, they had Tommy Clefitas.
Tommy Clefitas, he's Ozzy's drummer.
And I thought, no, look, I'll sort of keep my memories because Sabbath. The truth is, Sabbath aren't my era. They're beforehand. Yeah, Ozzy is. I saw Ozzy when he came to Australia in 1998. That was the first time he toured here. He tried to come in many times beforehand, but it was always aborted for some reason.
But I thought probably immigration.
Well, I think he's had a very colourful relationship with drugs and alcohol. Let's just say that, and that's clearly obvious. God knows how he's alive at the moment, the poor bastard. But
we saw him last summer. I mean, he did the Commonwealth Games closing.
That was good.
He went. It was good fun that. we he was unsteady when he got there, but the adrenaline kicked in, and he was brilliant. He was funny, and I think that gave him a real boost.
So you had something to do with the production and the mixing side of it there.
Yeah, because we needed to we did the opening. Tony did the opening, and then they did the closing. We had to provide backup to the broadcast. Like any of these big events, you have to have backups of everything. So it was a really nice thing, because when we were making 13, during 2012 was when the Olympics happened. So we'd been heavily influenced by the positivity and everything that was going on in Britain at the time, because I can't remember, when did Sydney had the 2000 Olympics, did it?
Correct.
And then there was 2004, 2008 was Beijing, I think. So
Athens,
it was
and
like
Beijing, then you guys.
That was it.
Yeah.
And then it was like, well, fucking Britain aren't going to be able to do anything. This will be a shit show. And we fucking rocked. It was a brilliant, brilliant Olympics. So we were really riding high on positivity. And so to be involved in that last year was wonderful. And we had some of the production staff and the designers and the staging people had done the last few Olympics, including 2012. So it was like one of those lifetime achievements. I mean, Mariana had a motorbike crash, a moped crash last summer. So she was on crutches for 3 months. But she was able to be part of that. And my son came and helped her, because I was there all day on the closing. And he helped her get up there. And we had a really nice, just a lovely event. And, everybody was just blown away by it. And I think that's sometimes what it comes down to. I saw Sharon and Ozzy at the end of it, just in the compound, just beaming. She was so chuffed at how Ozzy had come to life.
Yeah.
And it just, that's why it's a bit sad with what's going on at the moment. He's obviously, he would just need so much of that adrenaline wise to get him back on the horse doing touring, that it's probably just too late for that. And I think that's the shame of it. Everybody gets older, the mortality creeps in, and you want to remember how it was. So, it's 10 years ago, 13. Like, fuck. Shit. God, I was in my 40s then. Wow. Jeez, so it's like, and you sort of, you forget how much time passes and what has happened. You can easily get caught up in all the negativity, and then you look back and you go, actually, you know what? What happened in fucking the last 20 years? This is incredible. So I guess that's just we're on this train and we can't get off, can we? We just have to sort of absorb everything and try to make the most of it in the best way possible.
No, I absolutely agree. Yeah, and look, I meant to. Some of these questions are starting to come through to me now, so I'll ask one more. But did you have to record Dave Holland back in the day, or did you have to remove his tracks?
Yes, I did. Yeah. I did his tracks and the other ones. The Dave Holland thing was. That's how I met Tony. Was when we were mixing Dusk. Kit said to me one day, he said, "Do you think you can prep the next session?" Because it would, this was like a full analog mix, 48 tracks. So we'd have to clear parts of the console, repatch, do all this kind of stuff. He says, "Do you mind if I go out for 2 or 3 hours?" I went, "Of course not. I thought we were off to the pub again, Kit." And he'd be like, "No, not on this occasion," because he said I'd invite you. He said, "No, I've heard that Tony Iommi's got Don Airy and Glenn Hughes in his home studio writing, and I just thought it'd be good to go and see him and maybe see if we can get him in here." So he went across, and then a couple of weeks later, when there was I think we possibly had a break in mixing, or there was some recalls to do or whatever. It came in and we mixed a couple of songs. And Kit then had to go off to do the a guy's name, Mark Matevich. The band's name was Steelheart, I think. It was Steelheart. And Mike Matevich. And he had to go off and help him out on a promotional tour. So Tony came in and started and was just putting demos down. They'd been working this little studio nearby, but he liked UB40's place. It was a bit more him. It was a proper studio. And he said, his manager, he came up to me and he said, would you fancy doing some recording? I've got some ideas. I went, yeah, of course, that'd be great. Because he's a really nice guy, funny as fuck. He seemed pretty relaxed. And my first proper day with him was after these mixes was Dave Holland, Glenn Hughes, and Don Airey turned up. And Don Airey was like second or third hero of mine. I was like, John Lord, number one, Rick Wakeman, number two, and Don Airey, number three. Because Don Airey did the beginning of Mr. Crowley and Eyes of the World by Rainbow. So I was like, I am going to bug the fuck out of you asking you how you did this. And he was lovely, Don. And Holland came in and he hadn't played drums in ages, and Glenn was fucking ripping the shit out of him about the fact that he used to wear slippers on stage. So he's there in the Judas Priest leathers and whatever, but he's wearing carpet slippers, all this stuff. And to be honest, nobody had any kind of inkling that anything untoward was going on. We just, years later, I had a call off Tony's manager saying that he'd been sent down for these alleged crimes, and Tony. And what had also happened was those songs that we'd recorded, which were only meant to be demos, had been leaked, and they'd come out as a bootleg.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah,
Tony wanted to right those wrongs. He said they weren't fit for release. He said there's some bloody good songs in there. He said I don't really want the association with someone that's been convicted. So here's an opportunity for us to, because he and Glenn were talking about working together again. So they said, well, why don't we just get back in and do what originally we wanted to do? Because the songs, there was only one riff that had ever been used from that, and it was the track that Tony did with Billy Corgan on his solo album.
Yeah.
And there's this riff in the middle of it that goes da-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na, 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 and it starts this, heavy riff thing. And Billy Corgan had liked that, so they put that in. So Tony said, I've got to come up with a new riff for that. So he came up with a new riff for that, and it was fucking brilliant. It's a track called Don't You Tell Me. And apart from beefing up some of the guitars and resurrecting the track which was known as Evil Sooty, because at the time I've got a great photo of the other drummer, Jimmy Copley, who sadly he died a few years ago. I've got a photo of Tony, me, and Jimmy, with Tony holding Sooty, the little bear, above my shoulder. Because what had happened was Tony was trying to do a solo album, and he didn't want it to be Sabbathy. He wanted it to be a little bit more just him. Without the constraints of Sabbath. So there was this one track called Time is the Healer, and it was so fucking Sabbath that they said we just can't put that on this project. And Glenn had nicknamed it Evil Sooty because it was just this heavy evil track as usual. So so that stuck. So Evil Sooty got resurrected, and we recut the drums. We cut them in a few days, and fixed anything that needed fixing. Didn't do any meaningful guitars. It was literally just new guitars on that one song. Everything else was just tidy it up and mix, do a couple of edits, and that was it. It got released. Then all the wankers came out and started saying that how dare we fuck with the original. And it's like, it was a fucking bootleg. Fuck off,
Yeah.
You shouldn't have had it in the first place. This is why I'm looking forward to this Forbidden being released, because nobody liked Forbidden, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to get loads of hate mail about the fact that I fucked with what should have been like the original album. All I did on this Forbidden album was Tony and I went through and chose and recomped guitar solos that felt more like they were him, because he was like, I never really got invested. It's interesting what you said about Bob Daisley. I think there was a time when Tony's investment in it had just gone. He was like, it's just becoming so much for me. This was after grunge had hit. This was 93, 94. So, you know, it's like we've gone in together and we've approached it like we've just been in the previous day working on some stuff, and now we're going to comp the stuff together. So we've done the album that Tony wants it to be. We did the same with what became the Depp sessions, because it was started at Depp UB40 studio, and that was the Dave Holland thing. And he had a groove to it. You know, he was a good drummer, but you can understand the horrible connotation. It is a real shame, because you got the you know, by association, the poor guys in Lost Prophets. It wasn't their fault. Their singer was a pedo, but it destroyed their career. It's vile. So you don't really want that association. And ultimately, the songs on that album are really good. There's some incredible Glenn Hughes vocals on that. Lyrics. He'd gone through rehab the year before, so he was raw. Everything about that album is him dealing with getting sober in 1995.
Yeah.
Or whenever it was. And it's a brilliant piece of story from him, you know. It's like, and just stunning bass playing. We had to tone it down a bit. I mean, we were having, because he's funny, Glenn. He shows off. He's a nutcase. And he'll put all these clever licks in. And you're like, nah, maybe not. So you chop a couple out. But I mean, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
He's larger than life, isn't he, Glenn? He just strikes me as that. He's just, he's got enough energy for 2 or 3 lifetimes.
Christ, he is brilliant. I mean, this is the thing about these people. In that camp, in the Sabbath side of things, they've been some of the funniest experiences that I've ever had, because they just have no filters at all. They are really, really funny people.
They're from a different era too, though, aren't they?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. But you know, they worked up from the grimy, horrible industrial areas around Birmingham, where there was no possible chance of getting out of there with any kind of career that was different to anybody else. It's probably like being a miner up in the northern area of the UK back in those days, when you know, all that you could do is go down the mine and that would be your life. You know, it wasn't exactly an incredible future, which makes it all the more amazing that Rob Halford survived with, you know, being in the closet for all those years. I mean, his book's incredible. It's stunning.
Yeah, his book's amazing. I listened to the audiobook too, to your point about audiobooks. It's but I mean, that's you do what you got to do to survive, right? That's what came to mind when I was listening to him talking about his life experiences there.
Yeah. And so I think I think with the it's a shame what happens, and we'll never know the truth behind Dave Holland, because he died, didn't he, a couple of years ago, and there was talk about it.
It should be mentioned he refutes the allegations.
I heard that.
The day he died, he denied. I mean,
it's terrible. You know, it's a shame that shit goes on, and it's a shame that we all know that there are people on death row that are never pardoned, and then later you find out that someone had some kind of axe to grind. It's awful. It really is.
Look, what we don't know. I think did a jury convict Dave Holland? I don't know,
because again, I guess all this happened when it originally came to being. I don't think the internet had been mentioned by the time we were redoing it in 2003, maybe. I doubt I had Wi-Fi. I don't think even that was a thing. So I never looked into that kind of stuff. I was just like, well, this is quite a nice opportunity to get another album out, and that led into Fused that came after it, which was a great solo album of Tony's. So really, I was
it's not even being blinkered. It's just like, again, I can't do anything about it, and it's not affecting me. So I better not delve. And I'm not trying to be politically correct or anything. I'm just like, I don't know.
No, we don't know. Yeah, no, it's the same thing with the Pete Townsend thing that happened around about the same era.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, look, just speaking plainly, I mean, he's got a lot more money than what Dave Holland ever had. I mean, his situation seemed to be pretty cut and dry to me. In terms of what the police found, and yet nothing happened. Yet with Dave Holland, he was convicted.
And Gary Glitter.
And Adam Manch. Yeah.
Do you know I mean, it's not funny, but it's like you can't, again, you've got to own it, and you can't deny shit goes on. So Kit Walvin, he did the final Gary Glitter album. He was all excited about it because he was I can't believe I'm going to work with Gary Glitter. This is hilarious. Because it was. It's like, fucking hell, Gary Glitter, brilliant. And Danny Sprigg, who was on the Cradle of Filth stuff, he did the first Lost Prophets album. I'm like, what is it about us? We've all been... It's a club I am a member of, but, But you can't erase history. That's the point. If you try to erase something, it's like when I went through all of my shit 9 years ago. As soon as I was strong enough, I was using my experiences of mental health problems to go and talk. And I've talked to young people. I've talked at NAM. I've done a lot for the mental health thing, and I've been very open about what went on with me and my weakness. I wouldn't say weaknesses, but the way I was nearly destroyed by it all, because it can't be used against me. I'm honest, and I tell you what, if all I ever did was have a terrible nervous breakdown and descend into the pits of despair and have a car crash with the Smirnoff factory for a few months and nearly die. Yeah. If that's all I ever did wrong, that's not so bad. And if people know about that because of the pressures of what this industry and the world can do to you, then I'm going to do good with that knowledge rather than try and deny the fact that, shit happens.
Yeah, it's very powerful.
And I have to, It is. And I have to say, Glenn Hughes, we worked with Duff McKagan for a very short time on one of the projects. And I look back at those two people and I think, my God, actually, that was almost a sign. Having been around those people as to how life can be better after trauma like that, because Glenn comedically says that he was booked into the Betty Ford clinic, but they couldn't get him in until Boxing Day, December the 26th. So he thought he'd do a new round of toot on Christmas Day, just have one last go, and it gave him a heart attack. Duff McKagan, famously, he was taken to hospital. His pancreas had exploded, and he was... stomach acid was going all down his leg internally, to see how those guys have turned their lives around and they're larger than life characters. I was like, there is sometimes you get a warning and it's what you do with it after that is important.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think that's really a good life lesson. Painful at the time, but it is. I kept my sense of humor all the way through. Yeah, exactly.
Well, you've had a wonderful career, mate. I mean, it's a career. It's an exemplary.
Well, I hope it's not over.
Well, it's a career that, in some ways, is. Look, I get the producers and engineers and mastering engineers. You are behind the scenes a little bit, but if it's not for you, the music doesn't happen. Okay, so the musicians are one part of it, but that's why I interviewed Chris Bell and Nigel Wingrove for the visual and the photographic aspect of what Cradle of Filth are all about, because they set the tone for the visual element of the band. You set the tone, and it is really important to make this point. You set the tone for what the band sounded like when they broke large. That's your handiwork that did that. And without that, would that band have broken large? It's debatable.
Absolutely, and I keep saying it's not me being humble, but Kit Walvin was massive in that album as well. That was the reason the album got made, and to the level it did. I did have a huge part in it, but if you're going to say a team effort, that was a bloody good team effort, because he put trust in me, and I hopefully ran with that. And Sprigg, Danny was great. He was good on it. He took a lot of what that album was about, and we took that into the following album. And so I'm proud of Dusk. I love it. I think it's a great album. It really is. I love it with all the tempo change as well. People are like, oh, it wanders about a bit, doesn't it? Shouldn't they have used a click? No. It's what it's meant to do.
People don't say that. They do say that. They have a clue. Yeah. Look, so the greatest albums ever. They have a cadence. Yeah. Don't they? They have a cadence, and
we didn't know about click tracks until the fucking mid '80s. No, '90s. They become the noose around drummers' necks nowadays. They're horrible things. They're not necessary unless you're doing technical death metal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, bands like Archspire and stuff, I totally understand why you need them, and Cryptopsy and that sort of stuff. But when it comes to vast symphonic stuff, I mean, I don't know, but do the percussionists in these vast chamber orchestras, do they use click tracks? I would click tracks. I would say that they wouldn't.
They're on the pulse of the conductor. Yeah. And I tell you what, because I do stuff for one of the conservatoires, Birmingham Conservatoire up near here, and I've heard conductors in training with an orchestra under their baton, and I've heard what a difference a conductor makes to an orchestra's performance.
Oh, right, yeah.
They are literally Harry Pottering the orchestra into being a unit, and it's incredible, and that is the pulse of the music. I learned classically. I remember seeing you get notes at the beginning of a sheet of music saying, approximately 96 crotchets to the minute or whatever, and it needs to be with a sort of a lilting feel. And you've sort of set the metronome, click, 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 and then you'd stop and you would play. And that's what derived the feel, and as you say, the ebb and the flow of it. It's really important. You can't. It is genre dependent, but I don't think there's that many bands that it has to be tied down to click tracks. There's a lot of stuff that goes on live where it's like, oh shit, yeah, they're flying in loads of stuff off tools and whatever. But I don't often hear of audience members saying, God, they dragged a bit, didn't they, in that second section of that song.
I only notice when you're out of the tracks. So as I'm a muso and I play with click track. We play with tracks because you've got to. If you're playing with Britney Spears songs or whatever, you need all that shit going on in the background. And if you don't play with a click, we have it coming through our monitors. So bing, boom, bing, boom. You hear this bloody thing going and you're playing along, and you actually, the only time you recognize it's there is if it's still going at the end of a song.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I've been a musician for I'm 44, so it's about 30 years now.
Right.
And about 20 years of that I've been playing regularly. So on stage, that is, and in front of an audience, I mean, like with a mixer and a console and all the usual stuff. And you become accustomed to certain things, don't you? But I bloody hate it, to be honest with you. I wish, to your point about the alligato, this sort of thing, just
follow the emotion of it.
Yeah.
And there's just this stuff. I mean, especially like with Tony, it really struck me once something. So I think it was even something Bill said to me years and years ago. He's like, I'm there to follow Tony. And it's like, you think of the drummer as the person that's leading
that's incredible,
the charge, but no, it's the riffs. And Tony's internal chronometer is incredible. He knows what that riff is meant to sound like. I mean, if you listen to some of the gigs from the 80s of on the remastered box sets, there was certainly something else influencing the time signature. I said to him, fuck me, mate. I was listening to I think it was volume 4 or something. They did a re-release a couple of years ago, and I was doing vinyl approvals. And
I remember. Did you do that? I remember listening to that.
I just listened to them. I'm
right.
just approving the actual vinyl so that there's quality control after the pressing, just to make sure there's nothing untoward. And I was fucking listening, and I phoned him. I said, "Christ!" I said, "I've just sat through a fucking 100 outtakes of." I don't know whether it was War Pigs or something. And then NIB happened. I said, and it sounded like you were all on fucking crack. He goes, "Well, it's probably coke, mate." But, it's like insane the speed some of these things went at. But generally, you just get this, the music's there to be enjoyed and to have this this pace to it that's meant to make your body move to it. And I get it. I know I'm very, very much sounding old now, and I'm not into speed metal, and I don't understand why anybody would want to do that. I've been to thrash gigs and they were fucking fantastic, but they were almost like punk because it was a different kind of Sturm und Drang of a massive performance of energy. It wasn't
way of framing it. Sturm und
Drang.
Yeah.
It's not something where it's like a technical exercise.
No, I know, but look, I from what I understand, I mean, these guys haven't come out and said it directly, but it's been implied. But we know that Dave Mustaine took a bunch of speed, and same thing with the guys in Slayer. I mean, that's how punk fused with Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin and these bands and became thrash metal. That's what happened. You know, it was these guys were playing classic guitar riffs, so Deep Purple riffs, this sort of thing, and Led Zeppelin riffs, and they're taking speed, and they're like, but we also love Sex Pistols and these other bands and Dead Kennedys and shit. And Megadeth were open about it. They wore the Dead Kennedy stickers on their guitars and stuff. Yeah. And two of the guys in the band, Gar Samuelson and Chris Poland, they were kicked out of the band for heavy drug use. Dave Mustaine was kicked out of Metallica for drug use.
No.
So this stuff, it's not new news. This stuff, and I mentioned it earlier on, as soon as Dave Mustaine got clean, around 1991, 1992, you can tell, you can hear the music just shifted. Yeah. It shifted big time. And that's we owe drugs are fucking bad. I get that. But we owe them a lot from a musical perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
they were mind enhancing, weren't they? They were like, they liberated people.
Yeah, they did, and they new ideas. They were a filter for new ideas too. It turned out, and these guys, young guys with huge egos like Dave Mustaine, who just wanted to kill everybody from stage, they were able to do that under the influence of these substances. I mean, I don't know. I don't think we can excuse Motley Crue on that front because God knows what we can excuse them on because not because I was
going to say there's not much you can excuse them for, but.
Oh, geez,
my God. I think I saw their first ever UK gig. I was at that Monsters of Rock at Castle Donington in 1984 when it was Motley Crue played their first gig over here. Gary Moore was doing Victims of the Future. Ozzy was doing Bark at the Moon, and Van Halen were doing 1984, and AC/DC headlined. And that's why I didn't go back for 25 years. It was like, yeah, done. But yeah, it's great. I love the fact that I've grown up through that era of music. It's brilliant. It's just where things weren't so faceless. People have personality. That's why someone a band like Ginger stick out because they've got Tatiana at the front. We walked out of one of their gigs because it was like being at a fucking rave. It was just like,
I'm with you. I'm totally with you on the Ginger thing. I think Tatiana's a superstar, but I'm not with the music. I look at the live gigs online, and to an extent, I look at the people who like them too. Fans base reflects the audience, and meaning that what the music what the musical experience is going to be when you go to a gig. And I watched a few of her live performances, like the gigs. The one down in Melbourne, she released, or that band releases as an entire album. I've listened to that, and I don't think I get it, to be honest with you, but that's okay. You don't get everything.
No. We're just getting old. You'll be catching me up soon.
44. Yeah, I feel it. Believe me, some days I feel it. But I mean, at least I've got some context and some perspective. I was there when black metal broke, and death, not death metal. Death metal's just a bit before my time insofar as when it broke with Cannibal Corpse and Morbid Angel.
Yeah.
But your involvement in the Cradle of Filth side of things, it's very important, mate. And I hope I've given you that impression sufficiently.
Yeah.
Without you, the music doesn't evolve the way it does. And I've listened to a bunch of your interviews, and you get asked about Judas Priest and Black Sabbath, and I understand that. But the Cradle of Filth thing has often been glossed over.
Yeah.
Whereas I actually think in a lot of ways that's the most important thing you've been a part of because of the impact it's had.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's on when I don't look at my website, why would I? But I think it's in there as one of the top three that I certainly up there because it was an important one. It's and I also do the shock value of it. I put it next to Britney Spears as well because that why wouldn't you? Cradle of Filth, Britney Spears, and Christina Aguilera. Why not?
Yeah, why
I'm
not?
diverse.
Same era.
Yeah, exactly. So it's it was important, and it had a massive impact on me because it opened my eyes to that genre. And to the fact that they weren't scary people, that it gave me the confidence to be part of something like the Gladiators. I was going to tell you about the Gladiators.
Let's do it. Go there.
I mean, it's only somewhat hilarious in hindsight because the Gladiators TV show was filmed. The UK one was filmed in Birmingham, and the new season was starting, and Stock Aitken and Waterman had written a new version of The Boys Are Back in Town for the Gladiators to come and perform. It was going to be like the pre-season adverts on TV. So we had the Gladiators come down to the studio to have in-studio stuff done where they could sing their vocals to The Boys Are Back in Town, and they're fully kitted out in all the lycra and everything. And it coincided with us making Dusk. And so upstairs is the guy who originally recorded Thin Lizzy's version of The Boys Are Back in Town, Kit Wolven. And downstairs you've got the lycra-clad Gladiators. And so Kit came downstairs and he nearly frightened the engineer to death because he said, "What are you doing to my song?" And then he explained who he was and everything. And the Gladiators had a nice laugh. And then it was decided that that catering was being supplied by the company, which I think the A&R guy for the company was one Simon Cowell, who turned up to oversee matters. So we had a really beautiful conservatory and chill out room on the top of the building. So Gladiators have all the catering in, and Wolf, who was the oldest one of them, said, "Who's that other band in here I keep seeing?" I said, "Oh, they're called Cradle of Filth. They're black metal. Do they want something to eat?" I went, "I don't know if they do, but I'm definitely getting them up here because this is going to be the funniest thing ever." So for the next hour, you've got the black metal hoodie-clad, inappropriate T-shirt and hoodie wearing Cradle of Filth mingling with the Gladiators for this one afternoon, eating canapes and drinking wine. And I tell you, it was one of the funniest fucking sights I've ever seen.
I hope there are photos of that somewhere.
Do you know what? I doubt there are. I mean, unless the Gladiators took some. Well, I was just in stitches because it was the two. Everybody was just being so polite.
Yeah.
It was like that was the thing about, like, even Barker was being polite. It was just this lovely image of the two worlds of that at the end we're just all bloody people, doing shows. Correct. It was hilarious. It was just really
it's all
nice.
Entertainment, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It was fun. So there's an image for you, Gladiators, and just look up the Gladiators from 1995.
I wonder if anybody listening or watching will have an actual image of that. Somebody, you wouldn't believe, Mike, how many people reach out to me after I call it the Chronicles of Filth, but the amount of people that have had some sort of significant involvement in the band that's completely hidden. but been
Right.
spoken about. Like the
Yeah.
bloke who directed and filmed the Funeral in Carpathia video.
Okay.
He reached out to me just this week. He said,
Wow.
yeah, I've got the video. He said he's got the shots, the whole thing.
Brilliant.
And I said, well, we've got to talk about this, and potentially there's another avenue, maybe bringing it to life. I don't know. I use Premiere Pro, so
Right.
I'm not saying I can do it, but I'm simply saying that I can put something together that resembles something that it might have been, going to look like or what have you.
That'd be
So
brilliant.
don't use. Yeah, so there's so much interest in this stuff.
Yeah.
And it's if for your own entertainment's value, go and have a look at the comments under a lot of the conversations that I've had.
Yeah.
So many people are so invested in it, and the people that direct message me, they're of the age that they'd remember Gladiators like I do.
Brilliant.
We had the Australian version. We had rugby league players playing Gladiators and all this sort of thing. And
we had international ones as well, didn't we? There was like the international Gladiators where we would where the Aussies would come over to the UK and vice versa.
Well, it's the same production company. It was the same.
Yes.
Whoever owned it globally, and it was just whether or not it was syndicated on whatever station back when we had free-to-air stations. So very, very different era and very nostalgic era for so many of us.
Mm.
And an important era from the perspective that it formed our tastes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've never been able to get over a lycra-clad woman with a pugil stick fighting.
Yeah, I know. There was until you mentioned it, I'd all but forgotten Gladiators. Actually,
it's probably a good thing. I started looking at the photos when I was talking to someone about it recently. I found the old photos. I'm like, oh my God. Fucking hell, it's hilarious. But again, brutal. A different era. It was something that probably wouldn't work these days. It'd be called sexist or something. God knows. There'd be some allegation of slander thrown at it. But it would be to do with slavery again because of the gladiators being basically slaves to the Roman Empire. You can't
nailed it right there.
Yeah. Don't glorify slavery. Oh God.
Yeah. It's all garbage, mate. But mate, your contribution to music will live on. May you continue to keep on doing what you're doing. I look forward to listening to many more of your mixes and your production work, mate. It's been so great. I mean, this conversation really, it's been a conversation for the ages. The detail that you've given me on so many unanswered questions are now answered.
Right. And
your involvement. You're one of those people, again, who's come up so often in conversation with people and through Messenger and get Mike on, it's like, I will brilliant. Eventually, I'll do it, don't worry. And I got around to it eventually. And thanks for responding,
Pleasure.
Thanks for getting back to me and doing this. I've reached out to Jan. I'll see if he gets back to me as well.
Don't mention the paper airplanes.
Yeah, just don't mention the war, to the Germans, eh?
That was kind of it.
But people will, I can tell you, Mike, people are going to really appreciate this one here. So thanks very much for participating.
Absolute pleasure. It's been nice hanging out.
Well, there he is, ladies and gentlemen, the great Mike Exeter. Thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that one. I should add, just to keep speculation at bay, that it was Adam Ant's father that was done for child abuse and not the man otherwise known as Stuart Goddard. So there you go. If you enjoyed that chat, go across to scarsandguitars.com. There's a link on the webpage called Cradle of Filth Conversations, and you can access so many of the chats with Cradle of Filth alumni and important people such as Mike in that link there. There are too many for me to mention here, and I'm having a chat to Paul Ryan as I'm doing this narration tomorrow. Really looking forward to that one there, and I'm sure many of you out there who've hit me up will be keen to listen to it. It's not just about Cradle of Filth. With Scars and Guitars, I've had conversations with so many more important people from the world of hard rock, rock and roll, heavy metal, extreme metal, and beyond. I'm talking about Chris from Skeletal Remains, Tobias Sammet from Avantasia, John Campbell from Lamb of God, Tony, my mate Tony Dolan from Venom Inc., Scott Carstairs from Fallujah, so many, in fact, far too many again for me to mention here. Just dive into the podcast link there and you can sample many of the conversations. Maybe if you like listening to the podcast, that means that you might want to read the book as well, because I've written one Scars and Guitars Volume 1, Conversations from the World of Heavy Metal and Beyond. On the front page of the website, there is a banner. Click that link and you'll be taken to a marketplace of your choice, and you can download a sample if you complete the purchase. I want to know because I want to thank you personally. There's some more information to come about the book, but before we get to that, I need to bid you a fond farewell. My name is Andrew Mackay Smith, and I'm the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast. Until next time, it is a very goodbye for now.
This is Eric Rattan of Cannibal Corpse. You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast with Andrew Mackay Smith.
I've been the host of the Scars and Guitars podcast since 2017. The first musician I interviewed for the show was David Vincent from Morbid Angel, and things have just snowballed from there. In all, I've posted almost 650 podcast episodes featuring conversations with many of the leading lights of rock, heavy metal, and beyond. It just got to a point where I thought, I need to write a book about all this, so that's exactly what I did. In Scars and Guitars Volume 1, you'll read a heap of deep reveals and commentary, such as Des Fafara talking about Coal Chamber and why the band will never return.
You know, if you're a band just starting out, you need to hear me. Do not start a band with partners. Ever.
Yeah, wise words there. Sage advice, mate, for anybody.
Don't ever, because I can't go do Coal Chamber right now unless I get others involved.
Phil Anselmo talks about the episode in his career which gives him the greatest sense of accomplishment.
I think the staying power of the fans and the staying power of the songs, you know, whether it's Pantera, Down, or Superjoint, the fans remember the songs.
Alex Skolnick from Testament confirms that, yes, playing the guitar in Ozzy's band is anything but an ordinary gig. Will Silent Oz from Dimmu Borgir write a book? Pa from Sabaton gives advice to people who want to start a band.
Look at the team around you, look at the bandmates. If the guys want to be on the stage, then it's all cool. If the guys want to be backstage, then it's not going to be cool.
Current and former members of Cradle of Filth discuss the band's seminal 90s material. Read about the reaction to George Lynch and Mark from Suicide Silence's comments when they throw shade at then President Donald Trump.
We have this idiotic monster, you know, this egotistical, self-aggrandizing, complete piece of shit in there. I just can't understand how we've gotten to this place.
And yeah, we kicked a hornet's nest with Sepultura. Percussive overlord Gene Hoglan talks about recording with Chuck Schuldiner.
Chuck was always, he was very open-minded, and he was into having his musicians that were playing with him just reach out for the best stuff that they had.
Phil Campbell from Motorhead discusses what it takes to get sober. John Five answers his critics who dismiss his tenure with Marilyn Manson.
You know, my name is John Five, and Manson gave me that name, and I had some of the best years of my life in that band and learned a lot. And
we get the lowdown on Treyarch Zagtoth from those who would know, including his mother. All across Scars and Guitars Volume 1, there are moments of tension, relief, tragedy, exhilaration, and throughout it all, you'll obtain insight that I believe no one else has managed to obtain from many of your favourite artists. So treat yourself. Scars and Guitars Volume 1 is currently available as an ebook with a print edition on the horizon. Follow the links attached and download a sample. I'm sure you'll be compelled to read the whole book.